Well, greetings, one and all, and welcome to another Breakfast Club Jamboree, or I think, what did I call this? Jamborism this time. And I'm sorry to say that at the moment I'm the only host here. So momentarily, I'm sure we'll have more guests showing up. But so if you're already here, please let me know so in the comments section, and you can ask me some questions, or we can have a discussion about whatever. In the meantime, I'll wait for other hosts to arrive. I just want to say I am feeling a little funky tonight, as you probably can tell. I'm in a particularly good mood and looking forward to some lively discussion with the usual gang in just a few minutes. I cannot explain why no one else is here at the beginning, especially since we started late tonight. But there you go. Anyway, where I am at the moment outside, the wind is raging between sort of anywhere between 20 and 50 miles an hour. It's gusting. And so there may be times when shit flies off the shelves, or you hear because it's pretty effing noisy out there off and on. Anyway, so I don't really want to jump into any major topics until we get some more hosts on the screen. So I'm not really sure where to go with this other than to say, I, like millions of other people, am going to be traveling for Thanksgiving. However, on this occasion, unless things change at the last minute, we're going to be going overland rather than in the air. Because when we get to the other end, we're having a very large family get-together with approximately 30, I think, people in the extended family. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. I don't mind doing the drive anymore. I'm so used to driving it now. I don't really mind, but it is like 1,000 miles there and 1,000 miles back. But it's not terrible. Anyway. So yeah, and sort of getting more acquainted with my American girlfriend's family. Oh, here we go. We have the additional host. Greetings, Raven. How are you doing?
I don't have quiet here, so.
Right. Hi. Right. Yeah. Is that a top or a dress you're wearing right now?
Just the top.
Yeah. Interesting pattern. I like it. Anyway, I decided, Raven, it occurred to me that in the 12 years or whatever it is I've been on YouTube, I have never done a scientific experiment to see if wearing a sequin hat increases the viewership or not. So that explains it. You shall see.
I mean, it might. So
you never know, right? You never know. Plus, I mean, not just because of the COVID, but mostly because of the COVID, I never get a chance to be interesting anymore. So, I guess online for this hour, a couple of hours every weekend is the most interesting I get to be in public. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Uh-oh. Now I'm by myself again, even though I'm not, but I am. Anyway. So do bear with us, dear viewers. I'm sorry for the jilted start that we're getting off here. Is not ideal, that's for sure. Anyway. So yeah, lots going on, which I hope when we get more hosts we can talk about. There's the supposedly going to sign the infrastructure on Monday, and there's the fact that Bannon got indicted yesterday, and there's a whole bunch of things I'd like to talk about when we get more people in the room. But let's talk about something more lighthearted, Raven, between the two of us until that time. So, go ahead. I've already been holding a ship here for 4 minutes.
I have a lot of noise around me.
Don't worry about it. This is real life, right? YouTube, not.
Peach went out. Peach went out. She went out with some coworkers. They went to a karaoke bar, and So I'm here with the kids.
Raven, have you ever done karaoke?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh
Yep.
yeah.
badly.
Well, I'm sure you've done karaoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to admit, I've many chances to do karaoke, but I'm so self-conscious about how bad my singing voice is. And I just can't. I couldn't do it. I had the chance to do it when I was in the Dominican Republic, and I never would have seen any of those people again. So it should have been easy, right? To stand up and just go, ah! But couldn't do it.
Yeah, I don't see why having a bad singing voice would keep you from doing karaoke, because that's the point.
It depends on where you are. Certainly, that's the way it is in the UK. In the UK, people just do it for a lark. So, it's like, in fact, if it's bad, you might get more cheers. But before I moved to the UK, so 30 plus years ago, in California, when I used to go to karaoke bars to watch the karaoke, I mean, you'd get booed off the stage if you couldn't really sing. I mean, they were cruel. If you didn't have a good singing voice, you better not get the fuck up there. So that's how it was in California back in the 80s. I don't know if it's still like that now or not, at least in my part of California. I shouldn't generalize about the whole state when I'm talking about my town, but yeah.
So there was a guy named, we called him Popcorn. I used to go to a bar every Thursday night. They had karaoke night, and I would go for that. And there's a guy there, Popcorn, and he was absolutely terrible. And he went to like the karaoke like national championships and all that kind of stuff. He was like a diehard karaoke singer, and he was god awful.
Well, I wish I had that kind of. I'd sooner take my clothes off in public than sing in public. That's just where my confidence is. Say again.
Have you ever taken your clothes off in public?
Let me think about that. I'm sure the answer is yes. I mean, it depends on how public you mean, because yes is the answer, but not like in a crowded public place necessarily. But yeah,
I'm the kind I would like climb up on the bar and strip. Yeah. So
full Monty.
No, usually down to like a G-string.
Right. Which in your case would have been a J string at the time.
No, a G-string, or a thong.
Right.
Thong, and I would, I went to a place that had a pole, and I stripped on the pole. Yeah. That was cool.
Well, sounds good. Hey, I don't know. Yeah, my days of blatant exhibitionism are dwindling. That's for sure. Yeah, I'm nearly 60 for Christ's sake. So, and I have every intention of growing old disgracefully, as previously evidenced by the past 10 years. You guys know me, but at the same time, I'm not sure how long that'll carry on or should carry on even. I always see people criticizing Madonna, for example, for still being a sexually sort of like open, exposing type person in her 60s. So.
Yeah, those people can get fucked.
Well, I just think it's funny. I don't agree. I think it's funny. I think if you feel sexy, make yourself feel sexy. Make yourself be sexy. What the fuck? What's wrong with it? And if other people don't like it, that's not your problem. That's the way I look at it. It doesn't hurt anybody, actually. And if people don't like it, well, I mean, I don't like everybody's perfume, but I don't tell them so. If Kazoom was here, he'd back me up on that, because Kazoom doesn't like soap or deodorant or anything of an artificial nature on his skin. So, yeah. Raven, you seem to be holding something in then. No?
I mean, I remember Kazoom has gone on many rants about, being able to smell people who were wearing perfume or cologne or scented soaps and stuff. And
yeah.
He thinks it's well, I don't know about now. I mean, there was a time where he actually had said that he thought it was that he thought it was kind of inconsiderate of people to use a lot of that stuff because not everybody, can handle it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I don't like smelling like products, really.
Yeah, Vegas. I actually believe that.
Mike smells like a French whore. How many French whores have you smelled, Vegas? Just out of curiosity, because if there's only one, that's not a good enough basis for comparison.
How many do you have to smell in order to compare them?
That's a good question. Let's throw that out to the group. I mean, how many French whores do you have to sniff before you feel that you have a general idea that they have a commonality of smell or not?
Are we being sex negative or racist with this one?
I'm just quoting the commenter. I'm not being either.
He is the sex negative racist one. Then.
Oh, well, then you probably got me there. You know what I mean? I mean, you know him and I don't. So, yeah. You probably got me there. You know what I mean? I mean,
I feel generally
you know
like
him and I don't. So, yeah. That was a hell of a delay.
Yeah, it was, except for I was putting on the show, so I could see what Vegas is saying.
Right.
He said Tootsie Roll.
Do you smell like a Tootsie Roll? Is that what he's saying?
No. No, he has never smelled me, to my knowledge.
Oh, right. Okay, I get it. Okay. So I thought you might have met up and he had a good sniff. You know what I mean? Like men do.
Maybe it's a unit of measurement.
No, Paul said, how many do you have to sniff to know?
Oh, right. Okay, I went right over my head.
2, 3.
Well, I went right over my head. I'm really sick now. Huh?
He didn't say Tootsie Pop. He said Tootsie Roll. This is still cryptic.
It's Vegas that we're talking about, though.
Well, it's Vegas that we're talking about. This could be a unit of measure.
Okay, I just have to put that comment up for the general amusement.
Yeah, I don't think so. You can't get away with that one on here.
Not even in the top 2. Yeah. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Right. Okay. Now we have a full screen. We can talk about stuff because I've been trying to avoid talking about stuff until we filled the screen up.
I wanted to tell Joe that I had a really good pork loin for dinner.
How good was it?
It was very good, probably because it came with a recipe. And it was shipped from HelloFresh, which is not a sponsor of the show, but their food actually is fresh. They live up to that word that they put in their name. And I liked it.
We use Dinnerly. It's the same kind of a service. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. One day we'll try HelloFresh.
I imagine it's like on the eastern side of the Mississippi, everybody does one thing, and on our side of the Mississippi, they do the other. Do you guys do like everybody does Lyft instead of Uber or something?
I do neither.
Yeah, you probably you call Best Foods mayonnaise Hellman's. Yeah.
Well, Hellman's is Hellman's. Hellman's is Hellman's.
It's Best Foods.
I prefer Kraft's.
It's Hellman's.
I hate mayonnaise, so there we go. We got the full variety.
Well, no, I agree with you there. The only exception I make is tuna salad. You gotta have mayonnaise in that, or else just tuna straight out of a can.
Every sandwich, French fries, tuna salad, chicken salad.
I'm like undercover brother. I got the little ring of hot sauce that I shoot on there to overcome the mayonnaise.
Lick off the spoon.
But if the only sandwiches I ever put it on is like a club sandwich, and I'll literally put it on, clean the knife off, and then scrape off as much as I can, so it's like a molecule thin layer just for lubrication.
Dun, dun, dun. Greetings,
Oh,
sir.
Eric,
Hey, what's happening, people?
good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Well, we haven't actually jumped into any meaty topics at the moment, but
We talked about pork loin.
well, I mean, that's hilarious. Actually, I didn't even mean to do the pun, so that makes it forgivable, right?
Exactly. Meaty topics. Well, don't switch to a meaty topic on my account by all means, because I'm not. It's Saturday night, and no, it's fine. Any topic is just fine. Nice to see you all.
Well, it's great to be here. Yeah, I hope you don't mind my sheer relentlessness with the invites. I can't help myself. I just do it. I could help myself, of course, but I don't.
No, but as I said before, I'm flattered that you even still send me invites, because I do actually mean to come in here every now and then, and I do every once in a while, like maybe twice or three times a year. But yeah, I'm always happy to see you guys and see what's happening in with my old friends. And this is the first time I've talked to Raven, I think, in her true form, and so that's awesome. And hugs to you, and hugs to everyone, but for that matter. And I hope the Facebook trolls leave you alone soon, because that's the most bizarre thing I ever read every day. I'm like these people exist, really?
I swear to God, this happens to a lot of women, and they don't say anything. I mean, I knew it happened, but to the extent that it's happening to me, it absolutely. I mean, like Peach, she doesn't answer messages. She doesn't. So if you look at her Facebook, it's all notifications. Like 20 plus on everything, or 99 plus. Where it gets to a point where it's just, and she doesn't answer them because why? Because it's message after message after message of, hey baby, let's see your tits. Here's a picture of my dick. Whatever. So like to be on the receiving end instead of like knowing that it happens, but being on the receiving, it's really wild. It's crazy.
I mean, that kind of stuff makes me wonder. Like, guys complain about women being radical or all this. I'm like, shit. Be glad that they're not castrating us all in parking lots with rusty tuna can lids. I mean, because I told you I got harassed once by a gay dude, and I don't even think he was serious. I think he was trying to test me to see if I would blurt out something homophobic or something. But it was really fucking uncomfortable. And I talked to Philip's wife, and I was like, is that what women go through? She's like, yeah, that's everyday shit. Like, are you kidding? I'd be punching motherfuckers everywhere.
She's just tired of me complaining. Like every time I start complaining about it, she like rolls her eyes, and she says, "Number one, admit it. Part of you loves it, and part of me loves it. Because you like the attention, and you like."
Raven, do you think part of them all love it? Then do you think?
I don't know, but I do like that that there are a lot of men who hit me up thinking that I am cisgendered, and have no idea that I'm trans. So I love that. So yeah, a part of me likes it, but a part of me is just kind of really appalled by it's just the nonstop. I mean, I get all kinds of messages, "Hey baby," and I answer going, "Hey Snookums."
So speaking of which, well, it's interesting you mentioned that too, because that was something I was curious about, because while I do know on a personal level, like maybe a handful of trans people, it's interesting the range of like how important it is for someone to pass, and that's so that what is your so it sounds like on that spectrum, like it's something that you are actually interested in, at least to some extent, until they send you a dick pic, and then
And there is a spectrum of as far as like attitudes as far as passing. I know a lot of trans women have like no real interest because
Aw.
because it's like you you're trying to contort yourself to fit stereotypes of women that women shouldn't even really be contorting themselves to fit into. So for somebody who has a man's body to try to do that is very difficult. I personally, considering I haven't had any surgeries, I think I pull it off well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but
Well, what's really start to me, like, because I see you every day practically, like pictures and in the shadows. So I see you all the time, and but it's like when you have like a now photo, when you have a photo from like a year ago, and that's when it's like, oh yeah, like whoa, yeah, that's when I really see it.
Right, because if you don't see it, if you look at a photo every day, it's kind of like evolution, right? It's
Right.
you suddenly see it and it's like really different. But and yeah, that's got to be interesting as well. Like it's weird because and I think I mentioned it in my in one of your original posts too when you first came out. It's like I I feel like I knew like a piece of this like 10 years ago, but like I thought that at the time, I assumed at the time that the only reason why you didn't go through further with it was because you didn't want to. Like it never even occurred to me that you felt like you couldn't, only because I knew you were at least out to some extent, but I didn't know that you were out in one way but not out in another, which if you know what I mean, which I wasn't expecting, I guess.
life throws all kinds of like complications at you, and things that you want to do and people who you want to be often gets put on the back burner. Other things become more important, and then it gets to a point where, well, now how do you pick up where you left off? You know.
Very huggy.
He is. Yes, he's also tired. So. Oh my God.
Good, Michael.
I was just wondering if our new guest brought a topic because there's topics being thrown around in the chat, but like I want to know what was the biggest screamable news story to you this week? Like what caught your eye?
Rittenhouse's judge.
Okay.
That was a thing for sure. You know what I found? This was something that flew a little bit under the radar. I mean, Rittenhouse's Judge was certainly a big story, and there were multiple stories about like weird stuff he said. And not only that, but there was also the Arbery trial. That one also had some had a yikes or two. But I thought the one thing that was kind of under the radar that I thought was kind of significant in some way. I don't know if you heard about this, that Tucker Carlson had surgery, and they actually prescribed for him some version of fentanyl, and he was caught on tape describing what it was like to one of his producers or something like that. I don't think he knew he was mic'd, and he was saying like it was such a weird feeling, and he was kind of talking about like how he would stuff that would normally bother him like suddenly just didn't bother him at all, like, and it was almost like the gears started turning, like starting to understand what maybe addiction was like, because this is someone who obviously has no clue about addiction. He thinks that people who have addictions are probably just degenerates to some extent in his eyes. But it was interesting because it really showed it kind of showed that maybe he got a little bit of a taste of like, oh, maybe I kind of understand what it's like to be an addict. I don't know that he necessarily had a full moment of clarity, as some might say, but I think it was interesting. Vice News did a piece on it.
Well, the thing that's kind of bizarre about that to me is that if you remember back when it was discovered that Rush Limbaugh had an addiction,
Yep.
And of course he was expecting compassion from liberals, and then of course when we didn't give it to him, they were like, oh, see, the liberals are full of crap. It's like, of course we're judging you by your standard, Rush, but all of a sudden people on the right wing were finding compassion for people with drug addictions. So you would think that after Rush was like, well, maybe there's more to this than I thought, that would have, would have meant something to Tucker. But of course, I think half the time it's for these guys. They need the issue. They need those wedge issues, so they continue to have to believe, whether they actually believe or not, in these things, just so they can continue to have the issue.
Yeah, the usual wedge issues, culture wars, all that.
Paul, you need to unmute if you're going to talk to me.
Can't hear you, Paul.
I don't want to.
Sorry, I do that all the time. That's something I'd like to dig into a little bit more generally with everybody here. This whole use of culture wars as a political instrument. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know why people fall for it. Thoughts?
They don't fall for it. They want it.
Explain.
Okay, so basically, if you look at like right-wing politics in the last 40 years, it's constantly seeking justification for shit they already believed. So if the data, whenever the data doesn't support their belief, they ignore the data or try to invalidate the data. If the data does support, or even if it's circumstantial, even if it's like real tenuous, they jump on every little bit of it. It's like, we want to believe certain things. We want certain things to be true, or people to behave like they're true. And so anything we can use as justification. And, like the whole thing with immigration, if they really actually wanted to end, undocumented workers from really being a thing, they would go after all the companies that hire them, and they would constantly, and we know it's mostly centered in certain industries. So we'd send the FBI and the police to these places constantly and find the shit out of these companies, and it's all on the books. It all could be done, but they don't, because they want the issue, because they want to stoke the bigotry, because bigotry sells to bigots.
It excuses their hate.
Right. Right. They can try to couch it as something intellectual. I'll be right back.
Also, from a more pragmatic point of view for them, it's just, even if you're just looking at it as a cold calculated thing electorally, it gets the base out, and that's always important, especially with off-cycle elections. Like living in Virginia, you saw what happened to us a couple weeks ago. It was very much, they threw the CRT thing in there, and they threw, McAuliffe saying, the parents, they made so much hay on this whole thing, like saying that the parents should decide what is taught in schools, which seems hugely impractical and didn't seem like a strange thing for him to say at all to me. But to a lot of parents on the more conservative side, they were like, what? The teachers get to decide what is taught, and that they were incensed by it, and it did drive them to the polls. And so, yeah, that's partly why they do it as well.
I curiously sometimes about what they think kids should be taught in school. I mean, I'm leaving out all the religious stuff that we've already discussed 10 years ago. There's some of that, but I mean, there's more stuff this whole dropping CRT thing. I mean, CRT, as far as I'm aware, isn't taught in K through 12 at all.
No, never.
I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. So basically what they seem to be objecting to, as far as I can perceive from what I read in the media, is that, you're not allowed to tell my kid that racism is bad. You're not allowed to do that. If I want my kid to think racism is bad, I'll tell him, but you're not allowed to tell him. That seems to be what they're coming out of. That seems to be the thrust of what they're.
That's the argument for most things when it comes to the right wing and what's being taught in school. I mean, here in New Jersey, there's the diversity education, which includes a lot of sex ed stuff. And in my county specifically, the right wingers are like all up in arms that they're going to teach, kids in high school that gay people exist. And it's just like, are you people nuts? These kids, if they're gay, by the time they're in high school, they already know.
Well, yeah, but see, if it's not mentioned in school, they'll never find out.
Right, just like no one will ever find out how to have sex if it's never taught in school. It's the same, it's the same argument for all kinds of things. And for this whole CRT, well, this whole CRT, I'll put it in air quotes thing, some of it is not necessarily even like racism is bad, but more like tons of racist things happened in the past. They don't want that being taught. And so other than maybe slavery, even in some cases, I don't know if that might be even 50-50, but like anything like redlining and all kinds of other, just all kinds of other things that happen, they kind of want to sweep that under the rug, it seems.
Slavery is not even 50-50 because they already try to pitch that it wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights and all that kind of bullshit. So they're already trying to, they've been trying to shift that narrative for 20 years.
And what is, the Texas school book thing, go a couple of years ago, they were trying to change the word slave to workers. So they weren't slaves, they're just workers, workers that didn't get paid and could be beat and to death. But hey, and their children could be sold out from under them. But there's workers, man.
They even had the balls to describe slaves as slaves in the Bible, for fuck's sake. I mean, if the Bible can do it, surely history books can do it, right?
The thing is based, and you hear it the most when I remember back during the 2016 election cycle when you would listen to the people like Trump. A lot of what they said, a lot of people were saying is that he doesn't try to apologize for America. Basically, the idea that if we admit that there's anything that America has ever done that was worthy of apologizing for, that's a sign of weakness, and yet you're tearing down America. That's because Al Franken, I think it was in Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them.
Mm-hmm.
He made the distinction that he said people on the left love America like you love your child. You your child may do bad things, but at the end of the day, no matter what they do, you're going to love them. And people on the right love America like a child loves their parent. So when you say anything bad about, you don't say anything bad about my mommy, and they're like little babies, and so they can't, so although they're allowed to criticize America all they want when they talk about the moral rot and all that bullshit, but they can't possibly, because basically it's kind of like if when you've seen it, I'm sure on YouTube in comments, you criticize a band, even somebody's like, well, you're saying that everyone who likes that band is a bad person. So conversely, if you say America did something wrong, then you're saying something bad about them.
Here's a little thought about the concept of patriotism that I think is quite unique to America, although maybe it's spreading a little bit elsewhere. But when I first moved to the UK in 1989, I had been brainwashed like the rest of us. And I was told my whole life that America was the greatest country in the world. And that was non-disputable fact. It wasn't a matter of statistics or anything. It's just, it was an emotional and intellectual truism that could not be questioned as far as I was aware. So I moved away, and I figured that British people were told that Britain was the best country in the world. British people are definitely not told that their country is the best country in the world. Not only, and they used to rule the world not that long ago, let's not forget, in terms of empire.
Well, what's interesting though, if you look at the hard monarchists and the pro-Brexiteers, some of them do have that attitude, like, or at least Britain was the best country back when we were stomping on brown people.
Well, yeah. But my point though is like even on the news and stuff, when I first moved over there in the 80s, Britain strived to be the best in Europe. That was their goal, the best of their local competitors. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, our neighbors are Mexico and Canada, and I think we do pretty well in that comparison. But don't get me wrong.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I just think that a lot of Europe in general has just seen a lot of pain and a lot of suffering because of that kind of thinking of that we're the best country.
Right.
It's.
Yeah, they're a little bit more. They're probably a bit more hesitant to go full nationalism,
especially in Germany, because they
exactly.
They pretty much beat that out of their own population, because they're like, no, this went badly before. We're not going down that road.
Right.
Back to the point about what's taught in schools. I think the biggest problem we have now is people thinking that it's okay for dumb people to teach dumb people, by extension of it's okay for dumb people to show up at school board meetings and have an opinion about what should be taught to children, when we should have the smart people, the educated people, deciding what should be taught to children. Every dumb person thinks that they have a say in what should be taught to children. I
Yeah.
think maybe at school board meetings, the first things they should ask every person who wants to speak is, and what are your credentials?
See, actually, I'm going to disagree with you here, Vegas. We're certainly not shifting in that direction. What people have been saying is it's not being taught in other than in college, and you also don't understand what it actually is.
Yeah,
Those are not mutually exclusive things.
Paul, also part of the platform that you don't like does not believe in literally doing everything that's in the Bible it's okay to do now, because they're really interested in sexual purity, right?
What a funny concept.
Yeah, they can't have women going around lying about how many people they've slept with, like Mary did. That would be not good. They want to know that they have a sexually pure woman.
Well, that's why in Judaism, the lineage is traced through the mother, because only the mother knows that that's her child. I mean, sure, we have DNA now, but they didn't have DNA, way back then.
Right. Well, that's interesting because there's a good friend of mine. He actually does genealogy stuff, as do I. The genealogy stuff that I do, I actually volunteer for an organization that helps find their biological parents, like if they were adopted or if there's genetic mysteries, that kind of stuff. And I've really enjoyed that. I've found probably in the past year and a half, I've found probably 12 to 15 parents, biological parents of people. It's just cool stuff.
You could be like DNA Columbo.
Yeah, that's basically it. It's solving genetic mysteries is what it literally is.
Wow.
And there are people that I'm working with people who are in their like 40s, 50s, 60s, never knew who one or both of their biological parents are. And I've figured it out. I've been able to figure it out and confirm it for them. So it's pretty cool. I really, really enjoy it. But so one of my friends does genealogy as well, but more in the traditional, like building a family tree. I mean, he uses Ancestry, he uses the computer stuff, but he uses Ancestry to find more information about the family, trying to, instead of going outward and working toward a solution, like the way I'm doing it, he's doing the traditional family tree where you try to get it as big as you can, kind of like Joe does, right? So, but he is Jewish, and he said that with Judaism in general, he said that is why it goes down through the maternal line, whether you're Jewish or not, because for sure if the family's there or whatever, for sure that it's her child, right. Whereas you don't know for 100% certainty that it's the husband's child. So that's why Judaism is somehow mature. That's how he was explaining it to me anyway.
Yeah. I mean, although it's funny, as far as the finding biological parents, I've actually been doing that too, mostly within my own family. I keep getting DNA matches to cousins who don't know who their parents are, and I've been helping them track them.
Yep. Oh, it's amazing. There's some of these cases that I take. There's literally, this has happened like 3 times now. I'll take a case, I'll solve it, but then there are other people, when I contact them about this other case, they're like, well, sorry, I wish I could help you, but I'm adopted too, so I don't know. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can help you too. And I end up helping them, and then I end up helping them. There's literally one case that 4 other cases spawned from that one case. They were all related within like second cousin range of each other. Some even close, some much closer than that even. It's pretty amazing.
That's kind of amazing that there's like a cluster of people giving up for adoption all within the same, within 1 or 2 steps, away from one another.
Yep, and what's typically happened is it's often in families that have, well, in one of the cases there was a lot of alcoholism in the family, and so there was just a lot of just all kinds of different behaviors. So it was interesting.
Let me show y'all something real quick. Okay, let me switch the screen real quick. Link. Oh, that's not the one. That's the one. All right. So back in the 90s, before the internet was a thing, my mom as a hobby got into all this genealogy stuff, and she went traipsing all across America looking up like marriage certificates and death certificates and birth certificates and photographs and talking to like distant relatives and really filling out the family tree. So see this big fat binder? This is full of all those certificates, and it's got loads of pictures. I've got pictures of relatives going back hundreds of years. Well, 150 years, because that's as old as pictures get. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, and look at some of these old certificates.
Wow,
that's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Anyway, so my mom did it like as apparently same as y'all. I mean, it's a labor of love for her, and she really did get to meet a lot of interesting extended family members who showed her nothing but incredible hospitality. She went to Pennsylvania and Ohio and elsewhere. And it's interesting because I think no matter, maybe it's different now because of the internet, but I mean, you do run into some dead ends when you're doing a family tree. There's some documents that you can't find, or that's pretty funny.
That's funny. I was actually thinking the same thing. The binder's full of women. That's kind of an old reference from like the 2012 presidential campaign, but that was exactly what I thought too.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, actually, Eric, did you hear about my aunt and uncle?
Which aunt and uncle?
The ones that I discovered.
You mentioned something a few weeks ago, but I'm not sure if this is the same thing.
Yeah, so you guys, well, I know Raven knows this, and Michael might know this, but I don't think Eric did, because we every once in a while Eric will call me and we'll talk about this kind of stuff. But so a few years ago, my mother tells me that she was told by her aunt shortly before she died that, hey, my grandmother gave up 2 children for adoption, and so so she basically said to my mom, hey, you have 2 siblings out there. We don't know if they're alive still or not. But so then a few weeks later, I go on to Ancestry, and I see I've got a close family match, and then I got a message. And it turned out, after figuring it out, it's from my mom's half brother. So he's a younger half brother. He lives in Chicago. I actually saw him recently when I was out there. And then while he came out to visit, and while he was visiting, I got a DNA match to this dude named Herman, and I'm like, with a Hispanic last name, like there's not a lot of Hispanic guys named Herman, right? So I found him on Facebook, and I hit him up. His mom hit me back, and we ended up figuring out that his mom was my first cousin, and my aunt was given up in a private adoption, as we figured out. I've basically ascertained that from what we know, and so we met her, and she actually lived like 3 miles from my mom for like 15 years. And they never met. They didn't know about one another.
Wow.
But now they all 3 of them are stay in contact and everything. And actually, my aunt is coming over for Thanksgiving in a few weeks, so that's really cool. So yeah, so I ended up meeting 5 new first cousins, and an aunt and an uncle, and and all that. So that was pretty cool.
That's really cool. Well, I'm glad you figured that out. You can fill in the blanks there. But like, so the strangest case that I had, I actually just wrapped up pretty much all of those cases. But there was one case where I was looking for figuring out who someone's father was. She knew her mother, but she didn't know who her father was, and her mom didn't know either, actually, because this was in the 80s, in Detroit, and the coke was flowing, and whatever was going on there. But I contacted this person, and she did not, and she was like, she thought that there was no mystery in her family. Her parents are still married in their 80s, and she thought whatever, and I was like, well, you know, you're definitely related to this other family on your father's side. You know, you're very closely related to this family. And she was like, well, what are you saying? I'm like, well, I mean, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but I don't think that your father is actually your biological father, which was, of course, kind of upsetting. And I wouldn't have told her that if I weren't certain, and I was certain. And come to find out that there were actually a total of 4 different people on Ancestry, all half siblings of each other, that were all from this same guy, and he was quite prolific over the years.
Were you able to ascertain whether he was aware that he had these litter of children all over the place?
So, judging by the information I got from living relatives, he didn't seem like the kind of guy who might have cared. One of the mothers of one of the people was 13 at the time when he was like 19, and another one was let's see, no, what? So one was 13 when he was 19, I think, and then there was another one that was 14 when he was 26.
Holy shit!
And yeah, or 25 or something like that. Which yeah, and the other 2 were in their 20s at the time. But yeah, there was that was a pretty wild case.
Once when I was a body piercer, I got invited to a dinner party by some relatively regular customers of mine. And, you know, they were only a little bit of what you might call the alternative side. All right. And so they invited me to this dinner party, and there were going to be some other guests, and I didn't know who I was going to meet. And I'm thinking to myself, I hope they're not setting me up with anybody. Thankfully, they were not doing that. But I met this other gentleman whose name I can't remember. And we're sitting across the dinner table having what would have been light conversation. And so I said, just, you know, as a casual, normal, everyday small talk thing to say, I said, so I'm just going to say Ed. I can't remember his name. So Ed, you got any kids? He says, yeah, I've got 11. I'm like, wow, that's a big family. He says, oh, it's not all one family. He says, I have 11 kids with 9 women. And I said, that's got to be pretty expensive at Christmas. And he said, I don't send them Christmas presents. Most of them I never even see. I only see like 2 or 3 of them. And those are the oldest ones. I don't really deal with the other ones. And I'm like, I'm looking at him across the table, and I just met him like an hour ago. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I find it impossible to respect. I did not know what else to say, you know?
Well, it's not you know, kind of like my father. I mean, he has somewhere between 17 to 20 children by at least 5, if not 6 or 7 women.
Wow.
So, I mean, my running joke whenever with my siblings, although it's only partially a joke, is that if I ever got single again, if I met a black woman I was interested in, I'm like, we're going to get DNA tested before we do anything, because I got to make sure you're not my sister.
Right.
Wow.
It's like that meme with the guy with the T-shirt that says, I think it looks like I think it was a joke thing, but there's a picture where it says his T-shirt says, I met my wife on Ancestry.com or something.
Wow.
Yikes.
There's a whole stand-up routine that could be made about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that was kind of cool is like my grandfather, you know, his ancestry is from, you know, his mother was from Ireland, his grandfather was from, you know, and you know, and his paternal grandfather was from Ireland. And the problem is it's a very common name. So I was kind of stuck. I found his father's name, and that was as far as I could get. And then thanks to DNA, I got matches first to 2, you know, one woman in northern, you know, north of the UK, or north of England, and one in London. And I was like, well, how the hell does that fit? And then I got matched to another woman who lives in Scotland, but she's from Newcastle, and that's all that same line. And they were able, you know, she was able to, the last one was able to fill in. We were able to figure out the common ancestor, and that filled in a whole bunch of the ancestry.
So when you do Ancestry or 23andMe or any of those online ones, do you have to send away like some hair or genetic material?
Spit.
Yeah, just spit in a tube, and then you put you just and then you send it back in, and yeah, there's so Ancestry is by far the biggest database at this point. 23andMe was one of the earliest to the game, and I think the databases were probably about the same size at one point, but Ancestry is definitely bigger now. But I did both. I actually did 23andMe back in like 2013, so pretty early on, and saw a bunch of my relatives. There's no genetic mysteries really in my family, so nothing too surprising came back. A bunch of Finnish people and some Swedes and British and various Americans that have been here a long time from the Northeast mostly. So not super surprising. Then I did Ancestry only like a year ago. And again, pretty much the same people. But one thing that's interesting, if you do Ancestry and if you have a bunch of relatives who you know that you can compare with, I have about 17 or so first cousins, and I've got a handful of them that are on Ancestry and or on 23andMe. Actually, like probably 6 or 7 of them actually. And it's interesting. Some of them have as little as like 10% match to me, and then others have 15% match to me. So there's quite a bit of variance in there, which makes sense. And it's never, because 12.5 is you're going to be your average for a first cousin, but because DNA is passed in chunks, there's a lot of it's not like flipping a coin a million times. It's like flipping a coin like 100 times. Like you can get, sometimes you'll get only 20 heads, or something like that, or 20, or rather 40 heads or 45, something like that. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, that's the thing, and that's funny. Every once in a while, I'll see an ad from Ancestry on Facebook, and there'll be people commenting, and you see people that are their siblings, and they're complaining. They're like, "This is bullshit because I only match my sibling 25%." And it's like, right, because yeah, you get half your DNA from each parent, but you don't necessarily get even amounts from each grandparent. So you can get way more of certain grandparents and way less, just the way it's those, like Eric said, all the those coin flips, how it works out. And that's why some siblings look almost identical and some don't look anything alike because they got different percentages from different grandparents.
Yeah, well, the phenotype thing. I mean, the actual looks thing. That is something that has tons of pitfalls. You just can't you cannot trust that. Like, there's a lot of people that are like, oh well, I look just like my dad and blah blah blah. Just the lady that I was talking about earlier. I was talking to her and she was like, oh, I look just like my dad, and then of course I find out that her father's not her biological father. So it's like, well, it you really can't go by that. But it's interesting too. You said 25%. If someone's 25%, actually, it's almost impossible to be a full sibling at that rate. So at 25%, I'd be like, someone has a different father or mother.
Remember the box, though. I mean, when you go through it's rare, but it's not impossible. That's like the lower limit.
25%? Yeah, that's like if you do you ever play with a DNA painter?
A what?
A DNA painter?
No.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting site that gives it. They actually they took tons and tons of data, like thousands of pieces of data, and they said how many centimorgans they are. Centimorgan is I know Joe of course knows this, but maybe not everybody does. So centimorgan is a measurement of how closely related or how large a chunk, how many chunks of DNA are the same. So if you are like related like 120 centimorgans, maybe that's like a second cousin once removed or something like that. And it's interesting because if you were to put in 25% into DNA Painter, it'll tell you that the chances of being a full sibling is 0, and it's essentially 0. But you can definitely get some weird stuff. Like I've definitely had some cases where they've said 80% chance that it's first cousin once removed, but it turns out it was second cousin, and that's where you get there's always a chance.
Yeah. The now one thing I'm curious, Eric, have you ever gone to GEDmatch?
Yes, I am familiar with GEDmatch, and that one's free, of course, as you know. And that one, well, unless you get there's other tools that you could pay for, but I just get the free version. But you can upload results from other sites. Like if you wanted to compare like a 23andMe result with an Ancestry.com result, you can compare the two by uploading them both into GEDmatch, because neither 23andMe nor Ancestry will allow you to upload from someplace else into their system. But you can upload them both into GEDmatch, and it's a little bit wonky. GEDmatch is kind of like it's kind of like using an old PC with that like it's on MS DOS or something. It's it's
Well,
not exactly.
Did you see the new version?
I've seen the new version. It's better. Yeah. I haven't played. I don't play with it all that much. Because typically, like if I'll do GEDmatch if I have to, but usually you're not usually going to get a better result there than you will from Ancestry or 23andMe. MyHeritage also is there. They both allow uploads from other places, and they also have their own test, so they're kind of unique in that sense. But they're only like the third biggest testing, I think. But,
Yeah, I mean, I just recently did my heritage. What was interesting to me is that now I've been getting, and my mother, our thing gives like 1 or 2% Scandinavian. It varies a little bit, and I assume that was coming through, the Irish line, because you figure all those Nordic people, conquering and everything.
yeah, we got around.
But what was interesting is I actually got matches to people in Scandinavian countries. I got a few Swedes and I got a few Norwegians, and I was like, I didn't expect that, which makes me think it's actually more recent than I was thinking.
Yeah, it wouldn't even have to be that recent. You could go back to even fourth cousins will possibly show up on there, and you could
Sure.
still easily get them.
Well, sure, but you think about fourth cousins only, that's only 5 steps back.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question for both of you. Because you know the answer to this question. I've been curious about this for years, about these internet genealogy things. What kind of release do you have to sign about your data? I mean, do you have sole control over it, or do they keep it on their database? And can they sell it on? Do you know?
You can delete it. You can delete it completely from their database. So you can, if you go into Ancestry, you can get rid of your data, have them destroy the sample, the original sample, if you want to. GEDmatch is also interesting because when they talk about these cold cases being solved through DNA. Most of the time they're using GEDmatch because you can't use Ancestry, and 23andMe and others don't allow themselves to be used for that purpose, for police purposes, but GEDmatch does. So it would be much easier. It would be easier to solve those cases if Ancestry did, because the size of the database is much larger. So you're going to get a lot more closer hits and a lot easier to solve. But in GEDmatch, when you upload, you can specify, you can uncheck the box to let police see the results or whatever. So if police are doing GEDmatch, they have to honor that by only using results that say allow it.
I'm not just thinking about police. I'm really also thinking about like medical insurance companies and stuff.
Yeah, so that's one of those things where insurance companies, I'm not sure that there is any law stopping insurance companies from treating people differently based on DNA, but I guarantee you the second that they did, there would be a lot of scrutiny and probably a bunch of laws passed. It's one of those things that, like, yeah, they might be able to do it, but they know that there would be a pretty big hammer coming down on them if they did do it.
Right. How's it going, Kazoom? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, good to be here. I just stepped in. I didn't know what I was coming into. I hadn't looked at the stream beforehand, so.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I was just thinking about you were talking about the percentages of DNA and whatever. I didn't really realize that it was too far off of 50-50. You know, I suppose it depends because you have, you know, billions of DNA strands, don't you, that make up a human being. So anyway, I find the whole thing kind of fascinating, but it's a little bit everything to do with like storage of your data these days and control of it is something that I have a lot of concern about. I think we already don't have enough control, and I'm reticent personally to put more data out there than I already have, because I mean, I've been online for 25 years now. So I've got an online presence, which is harvestable. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want to increase that any more than necessary.
It's funny. You're just a side note, but like your time in Britain came out just for a second there. You said you know what I mean. That's one of those things I hear British people say all the time. So just the way you said it. But anyway, so in terms of like where the data is going, I mean, yeah, it is a real thing that should be looked at, and it certainly should be honored, whatever it is that their terms of service are and stuff. Honestly, to me, it's never been like a pet thing of mine. Personal data, which is kind of odd considering the career, the profession that I'm in, but I'm not that concerned necessarily about that piece of it, like my data being out there. Like I said, I'm not worried about the insurance piece, because number one, all that stuff's really in its infancy now in terms of like what you can gather. And I know in the future it'll get better. But I don't think that like Gattaca is going to suddenly become a documentary. But I know that's the fear.
But I mean, there is little things like if you've been on YouTube a long time, you might remember about 10 or even 12 years ago, there used to be a video about some guy calling up to order a pizza, and the girl on the other end of the line had like all of his personal data and, you know, knew how much money he'd been spending. And are you sure you want to have another pizza this soon after your last one, and all that kind of, and, you know, she had everything about him like in front of her on her screen just because he was ordering a pizza. You know what I mean? And that, I think, isn't too Black Mirror. I think that potentiality already exists. You know?
Right? Do they have a social score?
I think it's probably a little exaggerated, but the thing is, like with DNA though, like for instance, if you only wanted to see what's my DNA breakdown, you weren't looking in matching cousins or anything like that. You don't actually have to have your data in the main database. So they won't actually compare you. No one will be able to find you. You know, using the DNA. I mean, I did because I wanted to find people. You know, especially since again I know I've got siblings I've never met, so I'd love to actually meet them. And there's also a small chance that there may be, you know, a child out there that I don't know about. Then I would like, if there is, I'd want to know.
Well, that was for sure. Hey, if you did meet your siblings, Joe, what would it satisfy? Is it curiosity, or is there an emotional component to what it would satisfy? And why would it? I'm curious, man. I've always wondered this stuff.
A little bit of both. In part, for the latter part. So I grew up. You know, my father, you know, obviously he had tons of children, and I was not, you know, I was not one of his wife's children, so he was not in my life very much. You know, he was around on and off until I was about 9, and then I didn't see him until I was in my early 20s, when, as it turned out, his wife and my step-grandfather were both in the hospital with cancer, and they were 2 rooms apart. And I happened to go to visit my grandfather, and I'm leaving, and I'm about to get on the elevator, and there's my father steps off the elevator, and I, you know, hadn't seen him in over a decade. And so growing up without a father around, like basically my step grandfather was he was my father figure. That's what I had.
Sure.
But, you know, so as a child, you know, you don't understand why things are the way they are. You just know that, hey, my dad's not around. Why isn't my daddy here? Why doesn't my daddy love me? You know, and that was hard. That really you know, worked on me for years. And so I know that it's likely that my other siblings, that want the other extras, they probably, there's a good chance they went through something similar.
Right.
And I feel that, there can be kind of healing, when you have people that, have gone through a similar kind of experience, and you have that familial connection, even though it's funny, like when I met like my cousins, we're, I'm in my 50s, they're all, 40s to 50s. We didn't know each other, but we connected like right away. It was just, so, and you wouldn't, it's like my cousin Adriana, she's coming over with my aunt for Thanksgiving, but we talk a lot, and, so I just have it, my hope is that I can have the same thing with the others. So whether or not that happens, we'll see, but.
Well, that's actually a really nice. That's actually a perfectly good reason to want to. Not that you need a reason, but that's a great reason. It's kind of like it probably. I would imagine it would feel somewhat like kind of closing the loop on something. Like you can sort of say, okay, well, I now know all of the people who went through the same thing that I did, and kind of not only heal maybe a little bit yourself, but help them if they went through the same thing, and you can kind of have this common experience and this common bond. And also, it would be interesting to see what the similarities are, because you hear a lot of stories, and I don't know if you've ever browsed through, like if you're on, you're probably on DNA Detectives and on Facebook, right?
I'm not actually. I should get on there, though.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. There's a lot of, there's fluff here and there, and there's a few Karens, but mostly it's pretty good. So it's really, they tell interesting stories about people getting together after however many years, and the different similarities between people, and it really makes you think about the nature nurture thing as well, and the strength of that. And also they do talk, of course, about emotions and like how hard it was to find, and how it took decades to figure out things. Yeah.
Well, like when I was in Chicago, I met my cousin Lauren. She was one of the people, looking for her birth family, and so I was able to figure out that our common ancestor is my grandfather, her great grandfather. Was not able to identify her father and mother, although and I basically pointed her in the right direction, and then she was able to find them. So we sat around, and we were both nervous. Neither of us knew what to expect, but we ended up talking for almost 3 hours, and about who we are and how we got here. And I was telling her about my my grandfather and about the family and what I knew. Like I showed her a picture. One of my great grandfathers, he was born to slavery in 1845 and died in the 50s. And I've got a picture of him. It's actually from his obituary. I was able to show her that. I'm like, hey, this is your great grandfather. And he was born a slave, and telling her about, like, I found another one of my great grandfathers. I found his 1867 voter registration in Alabama, and so far that's the furthest back I've seen of any family registering to vote. And that was very emotional. It was very emotional for me when I found it, and then showing her that document, same thing. It was very emotional for her, even though she knew nothing of this, but she already felt a connection to it.
Well, it's great that he was able to vote it, like, and oddly, decades later, it would have actually been harder for him to vote than it was at that time, probably.
Yep.
In fact, almost certainly, because
well, that's why. I mean, basically, those first elections after slavery ended,
right?
A lot of black people voted, and a lot of black candidates won seats in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were like, "Oh, we can't have that."
Mm-hmm.
But,
Joe, supposing you found out that you did have an unknown child, how old roughly do you reckon it would be?
About 21, 22.
Right. Okay. So if someone 30 came in, they'd be like, no, sorry, get out. It can't be you.
Well, I mean, it would be possible, but like there's an encounter I had with somebody, and then they weren't around, like, and mutual friends. They're like, I found out she was pregnant, and then I was never able to get in contact with her again. So it might have been mine, might have been somebody else's, but it was possible that it was mine. And so if there's a baby Joey out there somewhere, I want to meet them.
Fair enough. Yeah, if you did meet them, what would be your first thing to say?
I would say, well, I'm sorry I wasn't around. I didn't know about you or how to reach you, or that you even existed. But if you wanted, if you needed, I'm here.
That's cool.
Yeah, a lot of the cases I work are like that too. There's a fair number of cases. There was a case that I just finished a few months ago where I figured out who her mother was through 23andMe, but there weren't very many hits on her father's side. So I was like, go ahead and take Ancestry also, because that's likely going to give you more hits. It will certainly going to give you more hits, and hopefully be able to figure out who your dad is. Turns out her dad had done Ancestry, had no idea she existed. He was already on Ancestry, and she called him. He's like, wow, okay. But they seemed to hit it off pretty well, and he seemed really nice. And her parents went to college together in like 1968, and it's a summer of love, et cetera, et cetera. And but there are a lot of there's tons of cases like that. I've had a handful of cases where the birth father was found and he had no idea.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know how I'd react if someone said, hey, you're my dad and I have DNA proof, because I'd be like, hell you say.
Right.
One of the things that I found interesting, that differences, like the demographic differences between the sites. So my mom is a quarter Ashkenazi Jew, but yet on 23andMe, literally, I was literally 50% of her DNA matches are Jewish.
Yeah. So there's but the reason behind that though, right?
No.
Okay. So that's likely to be
Isn't that what you were talking about before, about how it can filter down?
No, it's sort of it's those. There are certain populations, and also Finnish people are a little bit like this as well. There's so much mixing in between. So if there's a relatively small group that increases in population relatively quickly, or a small group that almost entirely is isolated, sometimes you can get. There will be chunks of DNA that like almost all of them have, and it's going to artificially inflate the percentage that they are related to you. And it doesn't mean they're going to inflate it to make it look like everyone's literally your cousin. It just means that there are enough chunks that it's going to look like everybody's like your fourth cousin, right? There's just going to be these little chunks like on my Ancestry and 23andMe. So I'm a quarter Finnish. My mother's parents immigrated from Finland, and then she was an anchor baby, as the conservatives like to call them these days. Back in the early 1900s, but I'm only a quarter Finnish, and yet half or more of my matches appear to be from Finland on 23andMe. So that kind of thing happens.
Right, but also that's true. But then still, you have to have that there are people with those chunks are using the same services. I mean, like for instance, I've got another part. She's also a quarter Hungarian, and almost none of her matches on the 23andMe are Hungarian. So it's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I do have very few. I'm the same amount Swedish as I am Finnish, and my grandfather was actually a Swedish immigrant. But I have very few Swedish ancestors on 23andMe or on Ancestry comparatively. So it does also, of course, depend partly on the size of families as well. But Ashkenazi Jews do tend to also have that trait where if you are a significant percentage Ashkenazi Jew, you're going to you're going to have more people on your DNA relatives list than average for sure.
Hey, I think I'd like to shift the conversation on. I think we might have exhausted the DNA conversation for the moment. But I would like to say, hi, Jack. How's it going? Uh-oh, that's how it's going.
I meant to click the mute button or the unmute button. It's going pretty good. I've been productively working on several projects, so I kind of got here a bit late. So I'm not sure where the conversation is, but it's.
Well, we've been talking about ancestry for about half hour now, but now that we have a whole variety of cast, as it were, I'd like to jump into something a little bit more. What's the word I shouldn't use? Oh yeah, I'm not going to use it. I remember it now. I have to remind me. I don't, no, but right. So I don't just want to talk about Bannon. I want to talk about the wider whole thing about what's going on with the 6th of January at the moment, because there's this whole narrative that they seem to want to spin. It's like, hey, Bannon's been indicted, so now everybody knows it's going to be serious. And on the same day Bannon gets indicted, Mark Meadows doesn't turn up for his subpoena. You know what I mean? And I get really frustrated. I understand that we have to have a legal process, and due process is part of democracy that I cherish. And I get that. At the same time, we're on a clock, and I just can't stand the idea that these fuckers might run the clock out as a tactic, and then we're due for like a fascist takeover in the next 2 to 3 years.
And that's it. That's what's driving you crazy. Due process isn't happening. So.
Well, yeah, the idea that our legal system is going to punish anybody from January 6th, I think, is it's hopeful at best, and in part because, I mean, I've talked about it before that there's sort of a right-wing bias or a right-wing privilege, that goes beyond just sort of white privilege, but the privilege of being on the side of the establishment is always going to get you off from legal consequences, whether you're, taking over
being on the side of the insurrection isn't being on the side of the establishment, is it?
Well, it's on the side of the established order of things, and like the sort of whole approach of the insurrection was to reestablish the dominant order that they felt like had been taken away from them, and the thing is for the most part, law enforcement and at least like not the letter of the law by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly the spirit that the law was written in is in favor of the sort of dominant order that the insurrectionists wanted. And so they're just sort of a wave of brown shirts who are operating in favor of that established order.
I totally disagree. I mean, the actions that they were doing were violating the Constitution. I mean, their entire thing was that they were upsetting.
No, you're thinking about sort of the framework we talk about the Constitution as a hollow document. We're not talking about what the Constitution is actually sort of.
I'm talking about the functions. I'm talking about the functions of government, though, and the peaceful transfer of power, which is part of the Constitution. There's a constitutional order. There's ceremonial things that we do, to pass the torch, so to speak. And
sure,
they tried
from a narrative perspective.
So, but they tried to stop that. I mean, they were like literally trying to stop the order.
Right, on behalf of returning things to the actual order that all of these things have been erected to help support. I mean, they're whatever the law says,
which is the exact opposite of what the establishment has always been.
No, the establishment is certainly the idea that everybody has a place to be in society and people shouldn't get out of their place, and that there is a natural hierarchical order to where everybody exists. And from that perspective, and I'm sort of avoiding using the word white supremacy because right now it's kind of flooding the conversation, and it's more or less it's accurate but not entirely accurate because it's not addressing class as much as it needs to. But the idea that America is that American citizens are to be leveraged for the purposes of capital and whatever color they are, but primarily people who are outside of the mainstream, whether that be people of color or poor people or whatever, are going to be more leveraged on behalf of capital as sort of milking cattle for that structure. And whatever the law says, the law has more or less been structured in a way to maintain that kind of hierarchical system instead of, like, we have all these ideals and we have all these stories and narratives about what those ideals mean, but I don't think that those ideals are set in stone in any way. They're all sort of pretty bunting on a framework that is designed to maintain this structure.
Well, and I just want to follow up on to that point. This is something that Tracy Harris has pointed out, and it's something I never really looked at it this way. But yeah, the Constitution literally guarantees a whole bunch of equal things to everybody. But the reality is, it's never actually worked that way. That basically for anyone who wasn't the cishet white male and landowner, that everybody else had to fight to actually get the rights that were enumerated in the Constitution.
Yeah, everybody gets to point to, hey, here's this document. Look what this document says. And, at the very most, the document is meant as a tool to sort of shame people into finally granting some measure of what the document claims that it's meant to grant. But that's not actually the point of the document in the first place. I mean, if anything, it's just sort of, a nice bit of wrapping paper.
I was trained to believe that the Constitution was to limit government, to show the limitations of government. If they followed the Constitution, maybe it would do that. But there's lots of examples where the government exceeds its authority regards the Constitution. The very existence of the TSA is an example of that.
Hey, what did you mean wrapping paper? What do you mean it's the paper the Constitution is like wrapping paper? What do you mean?
It's a very attractive set of ideals. It's you could gold leaf it and everything, but what is it actually covering or hiding? And what is the framework that it's sort of been papered over? I can't think of a point in American history where the ideals of the Constitution in any stretch of the imagination have been followed to the letter. Like, it's always been this thing that, like, it's a Mott and Bailey scenario where, the Constitution is the thing that you can always point to that says this is all excellent, and sad Zonstar had to leave. I haven't been on with him before. I would have liked to talk, but that just from the very beginning, any of the ideals in the Constitution were meant to look as genuinely ethical as possible. But the actions that the U.S. has ever taken, like, we've never taken real ethics into consideration. We always kind of like, oh yeah, we'll make treaties with Native Americans and then break those treaties and murder whole villages and force people to walk across many states and long marches
and then ban education about all that, so you can't teach it in school.
And if anybody criticizes us for it, then we'll just point to the wrapping paper. Look how pretty it is. It's really gorgeous. This is a wonderful box of ideas that we absolutely hold to wholeheartedly, and yet there's no evidence of that in our actions.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, if it took till 1920 for women to get the right to vote, and even then it was wasn't protected, and it took the Voting Rights Act in 64 to at least on paper guarantee people the right to vote and not be excluded by race. And we know even today there's laws being passed that while they're not explicitly against black and brown people, they're set up in ways that will marginalize and selectively take more votes away from black people than anybody else. So that's how they get around it. This way, it's not strictly black people. Fuck those Negroes. It's we'll just shut down almost all the voting places where black people live.
If these shenanigans work, which seems at least plausible, what's the correct response?
I mean, I'm always going to say get people out in the streets, but I'm permanently sort of scarred by the memory of 2003 in March, where the world's largest protest against the Iraq War occurred, worldwide, and yet we went to war in Iraq. I mean, there's a tremendous.
I was in that protest.
Yeah, I think probably everyone here, I imagine, was involved in at some degree. Well, you might have actually been in the war.
2003? Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so you weren't allowed in the protest.
Yeah, not really. I was busy fighting.
I was busy.
Well, and to further your point, Jack, you think about too how the people on top, for the people, everyone who went out there and protested the war, which was a good thing to protest. You're not patriotic, or you hate the troops. You hate the troops. It's not that you don't like the policy in which the troops are used. You hate the physical people that are used as the instrument of that policy.
Yeah, there's always ways to deflect, the blame or the anger back onto some other smaller group of people. You can always kind of pit the poor veterans, who a lot of them joined the military simply because there weren't a whole lot of other options, against the other poor people who are concerned that the budget that might go to housing and schools is instead going to aircraft carriers and bombs.
Right.
Well, and even on the small level, there was something I just saw today. A friend of mine posted an article that she replied to. The police department in some podunk piece of shit town, but basically making a big deal like, we arrested this person because they were, it was a homeless guy, and they showed the money that he collected panhandling, $234, and it was like he was, we got him, and he was, we caught him publicly urinating and drinking in public, and I'm like, he doesn't have a place to fucking live. Of course he urinated outside, you fucking, degenerate bastards, but this is a citizen who has rights, and I'm sure that some people in the comments were like, well, by law they have to give him his money back. I'm like, you've apparently never heard of civil asset forfeiture, because panhandling is a crime. So therefore, his money was the proceeds of a crime, and they can keep it.
Well, and even with a civil asset forfeiture, it doesn't have to be money that was earned in the service of a crime, because
they just have to believe that it was.
Yeah, and not even believe that it was, because the bizarre way in which that program or structure is written, I hesitate to call it a law because it's more of a network of laws, but they're not prosecuting the person who owns the money. They're prosecuting the money itself as an entity, which is just the most bizarre legal concept that
that article comes up every now and then, floats around, and all these people always commenting on it about how those damn homeless people don't give them money. They're just going to buy, drugs and whatever.
Well, and even in supposedly liberal Austin, which is, Austin says blue as you're going to get in Texas. friends with Tracy Harris, and when I was down there in June, she took me around, and basically the Austin passed a whole bunch of like anti-homeless laws to make it so it's illegal to be camping now, and so they have basically people living under bridges because they have nowhere else to go, and then the police come by and rouse them, every day, every other day, and they went and they spent millions of dollars to put in those fucking benches that have the arm separator in between so that the homeless can't sleep on them, and put spikes on every railing. And I'm like, you could have spent that money to help them, to give them housing and give them food and shelter and, clean water.
And it's more humane, and it's more effective.
It's the same in every liberal bastion. I mean, I was just watching a video recently. I think it was Johnny Harris put out in combination with the New York Times. And it was a great video. But like it's stuff that we already know, but seeing it in kind of, statistics like that, it hits kind of hard that, 13 states you have Democratic governors or Democratic state lawmakers who are essentially, not opposed for the most part, have the large proportion of power in that state. And those states are no better in many regards than some of the worst states that we commonly talk about, like Mississippi or Alabama. And it just, I mean, it's somewhat demoralizing when you think about it in the context of wanting this to be a functioning democracy where the will of the people, and particularly the most disenfranchised people, are aided as citizens, as sons and daughters of the republic, if you put it in the flowery language of the pretty wrapping paper. But it's we see that it doesn't matter what political party is in control if the disconnect is a class disconnect. It's that if you have people who are exceptionally wealthy and exceptionally disconnected from working people, and particularly from the homeless, it's really difficult to see how they muster enough empathy, particularly when these aren't the people who are paying for their campaigns. How do you get them to a point where they go, actually, this is a genuine problem? Like, does a lawmaker's father need to be homeless out in the street before, somebody recognizes this?
I think they need to be convinced that the poor will turn up to the polls. I think that they assume, whether or not incorrectly, that poor people don't vote.
They generally don't.
But, and I think actually generally there's a large portion of the population that would prefer to not spend money to help homeless people, and they'll want to do other things. So if a politician starts talking about programs for the homeless, they're not going to get lots of traction.
Yeah,
well, that's somebody that's going to get. They've got a drug problem. They've got mental problems. They've failed at life, but I haven't, and I need help.
That whole narrative needs to be turned upside down on its head, though, especially in the aftermath of COVID.
Yeah. Well, especially what gets me about it is when they say, "Oh, well, they're alcoholics." I'm like, right? You don't see that. You don't see the connection here. It's not, and most of them are not alcoholics because they're homeless. They're not homeless because they're alcoholics. They're alcoholics because they're homeless.
Yeah.
Well, sure. And quite honestly, I mean, people have said this to me, I don't want to give them money because, they're going to spend it on drugs, or they're going to spend it on alcohol or whatever. And my attitude is, if that's all they're going to consume today, then that's dinner, and that's fine.
Yeah. And, people will go to parties all the time with their friends and like loan them, $50 to, get a whole bunch of cocktails or whatever. It's like, we give money to each other all the time to people we consider, part of our tribe who will spend it on drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, I don't remember his name, the comedian, but the Lazy Boy, they use his comedy skit as the song. And he said, you shouldn't give the homeless people money because he's going to waste it. He's going to waste it on drugs and alcohol. That's what I'm going to use it on. Why am I judging this poor bastard?
I was going to say the exact same thing, Raven.
That's a great point.
my actual attitude about it is, whether it's giving money to the homeless or giving it to my friend or my kids or whoever. I mean, once I give it to you, it's yours, and it's not mine. It's yours. I gave it to you.
I was in New Orleans one time when I was in New Orleans. I'm like walking around, and this young guy, like late, he's like 19, 21, somewhere in that range, and he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, I'm homeless." He says, Can you give me $10 so I can get some vodka? And I was just like, you were very honest. Here you go. Here's $10. Yeah.
That's the strategy of a lot of guys who are flying a sign downtown. Need a couple bucks to buy a beer, and that's exactly what's on their sign.
Mhm.
Need some money to buy some pot, and they do as good as any other sign. I personally am of the persuasion that I will not give anyone homeless money, but especially if Misty's with me, we're pulling around to McDonald's and we're going to get them a Happy Meal and drop them that.
There you go.
If you're one of those people who won't give money, then still help. That doesn't absolve you of helping if they want food. If they say they want food.
So I used to live in the city of Patterson. And as we've discussed on the show before, Patterson is a pretty rough city. It's a city where hope has died.
Yeah, you said the whole thing's like inner city.
No. Let me correct you, Raven. Hope didn't die in Patterson. Hope was chased down an alleyway and stabbed in the back.
Stabbed, yeah. But Patterson's a bad city. Anyway, so I lived on the east side of Patterson, and the worst, one of the worst areas of Patterson. But I lived on the east side, and there was this homeless guy out in front of. There was like a little strip mall kind of a thing, and a Dunkin' Donuts, right? And there's like a U-turn there. There's just kind of like a jug handle kind of a thing. Anyway, so I was waiting at the light, and he had a sign that said, asking for money for food. So I stopped at the deli, and I got him a sandwich, one of those pre-made jobbers, right? And I went back around the whole thing and sat in traffic again, just so I could give it to him. So I pulled up and I handed him the sandwich, and he looked at me and he said, "What the fuck am I gonna do with this?" So I took it back. And I opened it up and I took a bite. I said, "Go fuck yourself." I drove away.
I mean, the thing is that there was this woman in the thing I was responding to today was like that she said I went and gave them McDonald's coupon books and then they threw it back at me. I'm like, well, a coupon, you can't buy food with a fucking coupon book.
No, the McDonald's ones you buy, they're basically vouchers for different items on the menu.
Right.
Yeah, they are sort of.
You can trade. One's a Big Mac, one's a shake, one's a drink, and you can buy the whole stack of them. It's like $25 for a $50 value too. It's more bang for your buck if you're getting.
But I thought you had to redeem something else at the same time.
No.
When I was homeless, I used to participate in public effect studies and things like that, and they'd always offer McDonald's vouchers as sort of payment for participating in the study or the questionnaire or whatever it was.
Right.
The thing is, I tried to point out to people, like, okay, so because this came up back a few years ago when a lot of red states were starting to drug test people that were on public assistance, and they're like, "Oh, we got to get them off," and I'm like, well, as it turned out, far fewer people on welfare were taking drugs than the general population.
Yeah.
So it's a huge waste of money. And two, I'm like, well, okay, yes, I don't want to feed someone's drug habit either. But what I would rather do is say, okay, we've detected that you're doing drugs, and obviously you shouldn't be doing that. So you have the choice of we'll get you treatment, and if you do that, you can continue to get and you stay clean, you can continue to get your funds, or then you would get kicked off. But it's the thing of like, but of course, the only way right wing knows how to deal with any problems is punishment, punitive.
The whole testing thing is punishment, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, either you're a human being and you deserve to survive, so you deserve the benefit, or not. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what benefits necessarily you're talking about, but. I mean, to me, I get really sort of worked up at this notion that I understand the reasons for some of it, like people, for example, on opioids, have to take a piss test once a month or whatever it might be, in order to make sure that they're not overdoing it or, mixing with alcohol or whatever else, And I understand there's like a health reason for that. But when it comes to, getting your benefit or not, I mean, if you're a human being, I don't know, if you're surviving, I don't know, man, I got mixed feelings about it.
So I wanted to address something that's in the chat. So, alcohol is actually a solution. Like, it is literally, technically, a solution because it's a mixture. It's a mixture of things.
Well,
Hard
you-
alcohol.
it-
Drinking
you-
alcohol.
In that sense, yeah.
It is possible to get pure alcohol, but you have to go through a lot of
True, yeah. Pure alcohol would not be a solution. That is true.
Yeah.
But most of the alcohol that we're buying is at least the stuff we're buying to drink.
But just just to be technical about it, Mage is correct.
Michael, I'm not going to probe you too much about why you don't give homeless people money, but I mean,
Okay. But I'll go ahead and say it.
I'll go right out and say it then. Yeah.
I managed the biggest detox in Denver downtown. I was the night shift charge counselor, and I had a 75-man bed, and half of those clients would then be during the day. If I was up and awake during the day driving around, I would see them flying a sign, and I knew exactly where they ended up later on that night.
Right.
So I do know for sure, personally, that does happen. If it were anywhere in the metro area in Denver, or even in Boulder or Colorado Springs, I would not be enabling people to be caught in that cycle.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Me and
Also,
Nicole had that conversation about whether you're trapping people in their position or not, and I have mixed feelings about it, because my attitude is, if you're starving right now, that's the immediate problem that I want to help you solve. I'm not going to worry about your long-term future right here in this minute. I'm going to hand you a fiber. You know what I mean? That's where my compassion leads me. And I know that there's a bigger picture. I get it.
I could also tell them where to find 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And there's multiple locations. The best one I've eaten at was Volunteers of America. Second best is Father Woody's in Denver. And I know where they all are. There's even little ones where, like at the Greek Theater, every morning there's donuts. They're day-old donuts, but they're passing out donuts, and everybody gets a donut. There's many places you can go to eat. Still doesn't make that life livable. And what they're trying to do is escape the reality that they're trapped in. But if you're going to be the person who doesn't want to give money to them in that moment, and you don't want to do anything to help them, you should be the kind of person who would vote for more services to help them get up out of that situation. But you don't find that. You find hypocrisy. People voting against raising a sales tax like 0.01% in order to start one little more shelter that's going to solve the problem like by 10%. They'll be like, no, we don't want to pay for it. We don't want it in our backyards. We want to do something to get rid of it.
yeah, NIMBYs are the biggest part of the problem, because I mean, from my position as somebody who's been homeless at several occasions, and I'm probably the model homeless person, because I've had, technically 3 times in my life, because I've been homeless 4 times. 3 of those times I have dug my way out of homelessness. And I've never been a drug user. I've had about 20 ounces of alcohol over the course of my entire life, mostly in like sips of other people's drinks that they wanted to, have me try or whatever. But as far as like the peak possible condition for getting out of homelessness, I have incredibly broad skill set. I'm a hard worker. I'm white. There's a whole lot of advantages I have. So I can speak to how difficult it is to get out of homelessness in the best possible scenario. One in which I have a fairly good number of friends who are willing to donate money to me at points where I really seriously needed it. And I was able, I've built up a Patreon and some other things. Of course, that's largely related to my artwork. It wasn't related to me being homeless, but it was an advantage that I had in order to like crawl up out of this position. And yet it's really, really freaking difficult. The amount of expense of just like existing, particularly when I was like living in a car and having to, repark it every few hours just to make sure that I didn't, run into problems with cops, or parking in parking lots in order to sleep, and just staying sort of one step ahead of getting tickets or being harassed by cops or anything like that. It's incredibly expensive. And, at one point I got a car taken away from me because the battery died. It couldn't be moved from a parking spot. I got a ticket. A week later, that ticket doubled in price. A month later, that ticket was doubled in price again, and it kept going up until basically they sent a tow truck. And this is long after I got the car moved from the spot that it originally got the ticket. But 6 months later, they took my car and they took my driver's license.
Wow.
And that's a situation over something like a $21 ticket or whatever it was originally. A $21 parking ticket can completely derail somebody's climb out of homelessness. And so from my perspective, I'm very, very much on the my belief is that housing first is the only real option to solving the homelessness problem. And here in Oregon, down in Ashland or nearby Ashland, I think there's an old Motel 6 that was bought by the city government, or maybe it was the state government, and then they converted it into like a 21 room, basically transitional housing facility. And the only reason that one worked is because it was a interstate motel that was far enough away from all other housing that it didn't totally get affected by the NIMBYs. And it was a motel that was struggling because of COVID and a whole bunch of other things. Like 1,000 things had to go right to get one place that offered 21 rooms to people who don't have houses. And there are, conservative estimate, 500,000 people in this country who are homeless.
So, I mean, I live in a county that is rural, like the entire county. There's not a single city in the entire county that I live in. And what I recently found out, like I knew there were homeless people in the county, but what I didn't know was how bad the problem was. And what I found out was behind every single grocery store in the county, behind the woods, behind the store, there's communities of homeless people that they're only there at night. That's where they go to sleep. But yeah, they live behind the supermarkets. I think it's easiest access to food.
Some of those supermarkets instruct their employees to be evil and puncture holes in every juice bottle that's like 1 day old before they throw it in the dumpster.
Or they
take all the day-old donuts and rip open the box so that it touches all that. Yeah.
Or they pour entire bottles of bleach over the entire dumpster, to make sure that every bit of food in that dumpster, all the fruits and vegetables and things that are, just, barely past their best appearance on the shelf date, are now completely inedible.
So, okay, I did say less than an hour ago that politicians won't even run on it, because they won't. That doesn't change the fact that Kazum is correct. The only ones who can really solve this problem is the government. So what has to happen is that the people need to convince the government that they need to do something about it. As unpopular as it is to run on, because it takes programs, it's going to take money, it's going to mean taxes, that means rich people are going to be against it, it means NIMBYs aren't going to want it in their yard, and the government is still going to have to, at some point, do something about it outside of criminalizing being homeless.
Well, I was going to say real quick, Paul, that the thing that gets me the most is that the housing first thing is fucking cheaper than what we do now. That's the thing. Everyone's like, oh, I don't want to pay taxes. You already are assholes, and you're paying more than you would have to if you did it the right way.
What I was just going to add to what Raven was just saying is, I mean, favoring the poor, caring about the poor has been taken out of political conversations since at least Ronald Reagan. Instead of talking about the poor, politicians started talking about the middle class, as if the middle class was the only demographic they needed to cater to, from a demographic standpoint, there might be some logic to that, but at the same time,
but they don't even cater
Bobby
to the
Kennedy,
middle
when he ran
class.
for president in 1968, talked about helping the poor people all the time. I mean, that's where the conversation was in 1968.
I was going to say that, Jack. I was going to say that exactly. They don't cater to the middle class. Here's the thing: they speak to the middle class. They speak. They will tell the middle class everything they want to hear. They will climb up on their soapbox and they will bang their chests and slam their fists down and point in the air and tell the middle class everything they want to hear, and then they'll cater to the rich.
Bernie Sanders is the only politician I ever heard talk about the shrinking middle class. You know what I mean? Because it's an expanding lower class is the implication of a shrinking middle class, right? I don't know if you all saw it on any social media, but last week I saw a commercial that was on German television, and they were saying that 20% of Americans are food insecure, so they're asking for charitable donations from Germans to send to American families for food.
I really wanted to talk about this, actually. I'm so glad you brought it up because there's a couple things here. The first is I knew that this was eventually coming. Like, obviously, we have food insecurity across the country. I was kind of surprised it was Germany that was the first country to do this. But the second thing is that's a real power move. Like, that is when you talk about sending money to help the poor of what had been the richest country in the world. That is an establishment that they are no longer a superpower. I mean, that is a kind of, it's a bigger thing that this commercial happened than I think maybe some people realize, or it hasn't been talked about a lot, but this is a major shift. It's not a minor marker.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's really got me down. Like, I was already down as it was. I was sick this week, and seeing that thing, and it just kind of got me in this spiral. And I'm like, I mean, America's always had a compassion problem, but it just seems like this is the worst it's been in my entire life. And I
That's
don't.
saying something.
What's that?
That's saying something.
Yeah.
I mean, I always thought, for most of my adult life, I thought things were getting better. It's only been sort of in the past 10 years I thought, hey, things are worse than I actually thought in terms of social divisions, and that includes racial tension, but it's not limited to that.
But think about it. There is a large segment of the population that would be more willing to overthrow the government than to help their fellow man.
And theoretically, the government is just how we collectively do things. That's at the very root of it. But I think everybody sees that the government does not do things for anybody who isn't McDonnell Douglas or, the Waltons or, the Koch brothers or whoever it is. That there is a widening gap between who gets the benefits of having a government, than I think any of us on this panel have ever seen. I don't feel like the government has done anything positive for the average person in 40 years.
I wouldn't say nothing, but it's what's been done has been proportionally squashed by other horrible things. Like I said a few weeks ago, I was just reading today about, I was looking over Navy ships, and like ships we bought, and they really can't do the role we want them to. So we spent, several $1 billion on ships that are going to be already started. we haven't finished building them yet, and we're already starting to take them out of service, but we're going to continue to build them anyway so we can retire them. And so they'll sit around before the replacement comes into service in about 5 years from now. Billions of dollars just pissed away on a bad idea.
Yeah, which easily could have been buying several old hotels or motels and converting them into transitional housing to help, and the great thing about a motel is like you have an office there already. Like you can already have a social worker or a job services agent or somebody to help with that transition right there. And, we could have bought a motel in every city in every large town in America probably for
I'm just
that
saying,
cost.
pander to the right wing. That office could also be a mini police station, if that's what you wanted, in all of the worst of neighborhoods. If you're going to buy hotel after hotel, there's an office that could be used for 2 hotels, and then turn the other office into mini police station, just to make sure that everything's equitable.
I just want to say to Kazum's comment that I posted on the screen there, if Howard Stern ran as a Democrat against Trump, it's what they call it's an outrider, isn't it? It's one of those things where it's basically to split the Democratic vote so Trump has a better chance of winning. It would have it's nothing to do with getting rid of Trump. If
Howard Stern hates Trump.
Yeah. I mean, he hates Trump, but like him running, it's the same scenario as when people were talking about Oprah running.
Right.
It's a way in which at least it depends on whether they get through the primaries or not, but it certainly splits the vote. And
there's a credible threat that The Rock's going to run.
Wow.
Literally, The Rock.
He was talking about running in 2020, but he didn't. So I'm pleased about that. I mean, there was already 25 people running in the Democratic Party. I think it was a pretty big field.
Yeah.
Do you think Biden or Kamala would have any chance in 2024? I think zero chance.
No. The Democrats are going to face a really difficult 2022. That it's silly and it's stupid, but we're going to see the pendulum swing back, and I think it's going to be set up for very bad politics in 2024. I'm very pessimistic about it, and I don't know.
Well, I actually agree with that, but I mean, I think this broad assumption that Trump is going to be the candidate for the GOP in 2024 is far too premature, and from a Republican standpoint, optimistic. I don't think the Republicans in the Congress. I think they go along with Trump because Trump didn't give them any choice. I think back in January, after Trump was no longer the president anymore, he threatened to split off and make a America First party, and that would have made the Republicans unelectable for a generation because it would have split the right side of the vote right down the middle, and so they had to either go along or realize that they were going to be all out of power. And I think
I think the majority of Republicans would still fully support a Trump presidency. I think most of them still really like Trump. So I think the likely people that will probably be on the Republican ticket would be either DeSantis or Trump.
Well, I think that Trump might not be available to be on the ticket by the time 2024 gets here.
There's also people like Josh Hawley, who is, a very dangerous character
he's jockeying
hard for that.
I think if Josh Hawley or Ron DeSantis or even Trump, were to run for president in 2024, they would be enough, I think, to fire up the left, to basically vote for whoever was running, like they did with Biden. I think they would do that. I think it would fire them up enough.
I don't think so. I think, just my circles anyway, I see a lot of dismal sense about voting at this point. And I think it's a similar situation to when Hillary was running, that there is a sense that the consequences are bad whichever candidate wins. And the horrible irony of all of this is the Democrats could easily, just like super easily, prevent their mass slaughter in 2022 at the polls by simply doing some of the things that are broadly popular
Fucking A.
that most Americans want. Like, and there's been this joke about like Biden's got to federally legalize weed in order to save his presidency, and that's not wrong. But like, there's a million little things like that
But
that they could do.
The problem is they can't though. Like, they're kind of powerless. They have Prime Minister Manchin to deal with.
To legalize weed, you just have to change the scheduling
Yeah.
with executive order.
But I mean,
That's
but as far as like giving the people what the vast majority of people want, that's not going to work. You can't. They can't. Their hands are tied. They can't get a frigging infrastructure bill passed without having to whittle it down to nothing because of Joe Manchin.
I mean, partly by choice, because they're not willing to address the filibuster. They're not willing to over or countermand the Senate parliamentarian. Like, there's a lot of artificial structures in there.
But they can't just remove that either, though. That there's rules.
They can absolutely fire the Senate parliamentarian and install somebody else.
No, but to change the Senate rules, though.
Change the Senate rules. They can't just willingly do that. They have to vote. They don't have the votes to do that. They cannot change the structure in order to do the things they need to do because they don't have the votes for that.
Right.
They can't. They have Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, he is number 49, and he will not do it. He won't do it. He said he won't. Not only has he said he wouldn't, when it came time to vote, he didn't. He won't. He's not going to do it. So until they can do something about him, then nothing's going to happen. And they can't do anything about him because if they were to basically kick him out of the party, well, now the Republicans are in control. So, I mean, there's nothing they can do.
Yeah. Now, this is a really good point, though. And I'm not sure that's the worst thing in the world. If you vote to censure Joe Manchin, kick him out of the party, put everything into Republican power, and then campaign for the next year straight on how the Republicans are screwing everything up and making sure that the average American doesn't get anything. You absolutely could change the narrative. Part of the problem is the Democrats won't ever use the bully pulpit. They didn't during Obama's administration. They rarely did during Clinton's time. There's a reluctance.
I got to disagree with you on Clinton. Clinton got a lot of things done, even when he was in the minority.
Right, but Clinton himself, but I mean the Democratic Party is largely shy to speak to the American people in a way that is meant to galvanize. They don't use rhetoric very often.
Well, they don't know because they're not very good at it. That's why.
It strikes me as a weird thing, though, to be bad at it for 30 years. We're talking about hundreds of Democrats at this point who have it gives the impression that there is something fundamental about being a Democrat that makes them just incapable of leveraging rhetoric.
No, there is. I said 25 years ago, and it's still true today, that the dynamic is the right wing is the battering husband, and the Democrats are the battered wife. They have battered wife syndrome and have for a very long time.
And they follow the rules. They do everything they do is done on good. Well, not everything they do, but I mean they operate basically on good faith. This is the way we're supposed to do things, so we're going to do them. Then they get their asses kicked. They say, "Well, we lost fair and square." And the other side doesn't do that.
I see them following the rules when it suits the elites and the ruling class. Like it's a Republicans break the rules in order to help the elites, and Democrats go, well, we got to follow the rules when they have to help the elites. Like there's that.
But it's the fact that they're following. But it's the fact that they're following the rules is why they can never get anything done.
There's this sense that the Democrats.
I know there's an entire demographic of people who are just going to say that if you're a Democrat, you're evil anyway. And many of those people are far leftist, and they refuse. They refuse to look at anything through unfiltered glasses. Everything they look at is filtered through the lens of, if you're a Democrat, you're evil. And it's hard to have conversations when your interlocutor is looking at things that way.
Yeah, it's also difficult to convince anybody the Democrats aren't evil. When
they're all evil,
when they
but
fail
I mean, it's
so consistently to do anything that would they don't even want to look like they're fighting on the behalf of working people or the poor,
because it's a vote loser, as Raven said earlier.
Here's the thing: is if you can't get elected, then you get nothing done. So the idea is they get elected and they get done what they can.
I mean, we see people like, Cory Bush or Jamal Bowman or AOC get elected on rhetoric.
Right, in very, very safe districts.
I'm from New Jersey. Joe and I are from New Jersey. And everybody thinks that New Jersey is a blue. Oh, New Jersey's so blue. New Jersey's so blue. New Jersey's so blue. Our Democratic governor just got reelected. It is the first time since the 1970s that a Democrat has been reelected in New Jersey. Republicans get reelected all the time. Republicans, we've had more Republican governors, I think, than we've had Democrats. This isn't a blue state that everybody thinks it is. The legislature turns out to be blue most of the time. But as far as like governor and all that, it doesn't always work. Why? Because when you work for the people, when you help people, when you create programs, you lose elections. So when you're the governor and you do a great job for the people as a Democrat, you will lose the next election. You're going to lose. Why? Because people are selfish fucks and they are pissed at you for running programs that help people.
Well, and I'll give you another example. Jim Florio. Jim Florio ran. He said he was going to try to hold the line on taxes. Gets in. Well, what ends up happening is Tom Kaine's second term, the deficit turned out to be much bigger than forecast. Much bigger, like $21 billion bigger, which for a state budget, especially back then, that was a huge amount of money. So he comes in. He's like, "Shit, I'm sorry, but there's no way that we can balance a budget without a tax increase." So he raised some taxes, balanced the budget. She got shit hammered. He was destroyed because he raised taxes, even though it was necessary. Anybody who was in there would either, because New Jersey, we can't run a deficit. The state can't run a deficit. Yeah. So
I mean, even if you raise taxes only on the rich, that doesn't matter, because then you'll have the middle class vote you out, because everybody is waiting to be a millionaire. Right,
yeah,
everybody's
the embarrassed millionaires that John Steinbeck talked about.
Right. Yeah, temporarily embarrassed millionaires. So I mean, it's just you can't as a sitting politician do things that are going to really change anything, because you will lose your seat if you do. And I think that I personally, my belief is that they should say what they need to say to get into office. Then once they're there, pass as much as they can possibly pass, and sacrifice themselves, throw themselves on the sword. That's what I think.
Yeah,
but that's where I'm at too.
But people, they grow to depend on they got paychecks, they got notoriety, they're giving speeches, they're on TV, and then they don't want to give that up.
Well, but here's the thing, though. I want to make a point to you, Jack. I agree with you. I agree with you as well, Jack. So the thing is, though, as Raven said, they have to say what it takes to get elected. Well, the stuff that they have to say to get elected does not attract progressives, because it's not that. You have to say not a lot of progressive things. So then progressives say, well, I don't want this person because they're not going to do progressive thing XYZ. So that's how it makes it. That's the one thing that makes it difficult. So it makes it kind of like, so how do, I mean, and again, granted, I get that the Democrats don't have a great record. I totally get that, but the problem is, so here's what ends up happening, and I've seen this over and over. So if progressives come out and vote for Democrats, Democrats deliver to whatever extent that they can. Progressives get disillusioned. They don't again, they don't vote, and then the Democrats get shit hammered. And then the Democrat, I've heard it most of my political life as I've been aware of things. The Democrats go, oh, I guess that's where the people are. So that's why the Democrats have shifted to the right over the course of my lifetime. I've watched it happen.
So Joe Biden, I wasn't thrilled about Joe Biden because he's Joe Biden. I didn't want Joe Biden because, well, he's Joe Biden.
Still dropping N-bombs in 2021.
Right. So he's Joe Biden. So while he was running, it turned out he had the most progressive platform outside of like Bernie Sanders of pretty much any presidential candidate ever. And when he got elected, that's it. He had this mandate, and he was promised he would be so progressive. And all of his things that he tried to do all started off very progressive. The Democrats allowed them all to get chewed down. And not so much because they don't want to do those things. It's because of the messaging they're getting from their constituents, the people who basically who gave them their jobs. The messaging they're getting is, you better not do that.
Yeah, I mean,
what constituents? Whoa! I gotta call that. What do you mean?
So basically, what most politicians consider to be their constituents are the people who voted for them.
Sure.
The people in their district who voted for them. Everyone in your district should be your constituent, right? Once you get elected, everybody is, you're the representative for all of them. But they don't see it that way, and you never do. You see it as the people who actually voted for you and will or will not vote for you again based on your actions.
Constituents are their campaign contributors.
Okay.
I was going to say things, but I was also
As somebody who ran for an office and was only finding the tiny little office, but I had to raise money. I had to go out there. I had to make speeches. I had to do the whole thing. Hate making speeches because every time I do, I go blank. I have no idea what I said, which I think happens to a lot of politicians. But anyway, my whole thing was when I was running, it didn't matter who I got money from and who I didn't. If I had won, I would be representing everybody in my district. That's just that's the job.
If one imagines that is the position that most first-time politicians are going to take, and this is where we get back to what Paul and Joe were talking about earlier. I think it's incredibly important to get the most progressive, aggressive politician in that you can. And I'm struggling to find a good term for this, but basically somebody who does not expect to last more than 1 or 2 terms, who will go in there with the sharpest elbows and the make the most noise and be a problem for the establishment, to be as aggressive and bullish on the things that the actual people need as much as they can, until they're finally kicked out by either the voters or their party. And I think the most damaging thing that I've witnessed in the last few years is seeing some politicians who I had a lot of hope in start to soften those edges to a point where it's great they're getting along better, but they're also not being very effective anymore.
Like AOC.
Well, here's one thing I want to say. Now, to your point that get the most progressive person that can win in that particular area, I agree with that. Here's the problem: Joe Manchin is the most progressive person you can get in West Virginia.
No, we've already talked about this. Bernie Sanders did far better than any of the Democrats in 2016 in Joe Manchin's district. And
He's a senator. There are no districts.
In his
Well,
for
but
his
again,
voters.
Well, okay,
in a
and
Bernie
primary-
Sanders won every single district in West Virginia
in a
and
primary against
Here's
Democrats.
against Hillary is what I'm saying, against Hillary.
Right.
In an
And-
open primary.
and
An open
here's
primary that conservatives can vote in.
here's the difference. Bernie Sanders was running for president, and Joe Manchin's a senator. And the way that the people of West Virginia look at that are that they're two different offices. And the reason that they look at it that way is because they are two different offices. West Virginia West Virginia has a history of being odd. That's how they ended up with Joe Manchin to begin with. I mean, it's a coal state. It's a conservative state. It's a cousin fucking state.
But the thing is somebody who is like Bernie Sanders recognizes that. This is why you get Ojeda and people who are much more salt of the earth and will speak better to coal miners than
Sure. And Ojeda lost, and I liked him. I sent him money, but he lost.
It doesn't, as somebody else said, I think it was Mage in the comments, said that there's a lot more respect for somebody who fights hard and loses than somebody who is, just
that's all fine and good. That and $1.20 gets you on the bus. It doesn't mean anything though. It doesn't mean at the end of the day. But what was that?
It's $2.50 in Portland, by the way.
Fair
Oh,
enough.
that's
Get
crazy.
on the bus.
That's just crazy. I don't need to ride that bad. I'll walk. But I mean, at the end of the day, you need to be in power to wield power. You need to be in power to make change.
Power is
going
not
out
just
there
being in office. Power is and as a great example is, Bernie Sanders changed the conversation from 2016 until today, and he didn't get into the presidency in either of his runs, and yet the reason that Joe Biden's platform looked as progressive as it did is because he had to go up against Bernie Sanders.
Right, and he had all those workshops with Bernie after the primaries.
Yeah.
And Bernie was his credibility, which now, because of Sinema and Manchin has been pissed away.
But now Ojeda ran in what, 2016?
He ran in 2020.
He ran 2020%?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's my whole point, Jack. See, this is where I get frustrated because it's like, well, if we had a real progressive there that the Democrats like and something, so to me, Ojeda was the perfect guy because he's progressive, he's ex-military, so he dispels all the bullshit that they usually throw at Democrats.
He was also attacked by the party mainstream. He was attacked by the DNC. I mean, they tried very hard to get Ojeda out of the race.
During the primary, and then once he was in, he was the candidate. But again,
they weren't supportive of him.
He didn't win. So the idea that there's going to be this big groundswell didn't happen. It didn't happen, Jack. So you got the right person who's that's the progressive person that we would want, and he lost.
So do it again. Do it again until they do win.
So I have a problem that the party.
So repeat. Okay. Yeah. So okay. I gotta keep hitting myself in the head and until the results.
So I have a problem.
We've got less than a decade left. Let me shout this as loud as it takes. Fix this.
And if
I have a
Republicans win, doomed.
I have a problem that the Democratic Party will pick a favorite before the primaries. Well, like they'll pick a favorite at all. Like it shouldn't be that way. They should primary, and then whoever wins that, then the party should be like, okay, how you doing? We're the DNC. Let's get to talking. And the fact that they're not doing that they're involved before the primaries, that's disturbing to me. That they're putting their finger on the scales because they are, because the weight and the clout and the credibility and the power and the strength of the party is behind a person that maybe the people don't really support, or they wouldn't support if it was a level playing field before the primaries.
It
And
has
this is
always
why
been thus. Back in the 30s and 40s, the vice president for FDR was a guy called, I think, Henry Wallace. And he was even more sort of liberal than FDR was. And they were basically a team. And the Democratic Party at the convention before the last election, basically in the middle of the night, literally in a smoke-filled room, made a deal to kick out the sitting vice president and move in Harry Truman because they knew this lefty was never going to drop the bomb. That happened literally like in the Democratic National Convention back in, was it 1940, I guess, 44 then, yeah, the last one, yeah, when Truman took over. And so the shenanigans have been going on for forever.
Well, I mean, that's actually literally not shenanigans, because again, there's no legal process that requires them to do anything else. Well, it's true. I mean, primaries are completely elective. They were not even common, and they didn't become a thing until after the '68 convention, because the '68 convention was an absolute fiasco, and they're like, well, we can't afford to have that shit happen on TV again.
This is when we go back to our earlier conversation about the Constitution, where the rules are really good and useful when they help prop up the hierarchical structure that already exists. And when the rules don't favor that, then you break the rules. And that's what we have.
I am all for primaries because I do think it's better to weed out, the people who are less likely to win. And you have, there you go, through the act of, of doing the primaries, through consensus, this is who we have, and that's who's going up. And that's why I think the party shouldn't get involved until after the primaries. So I don't think the primaries are a bad thing, even if they're not, in the Constitution. No,
I mean, that they do them for a reason.
Well, in the case of Henry Wallace, he was the sitting vice president for 3 consecutive terms and went to bed thinking he was going to get the nomination approved by the convention the next morning. And in the middle of the night, they moved him out and moved Truman in. You know what I mean?
I mean, I agree with Joe on that, though. I mean, it looks shady, and it is kind of shady, but I mean, they didn't do anything really wrong. They're entitled to do that. There was nothing saying that they shouldn't or couldn't.
I mean, if you think about why they were doing it, though, I mean,
and why they were doing it,
why I said they were doing it was my conjecture. That's not necessarily historical fact, but the fact is they moved him out, and then a year later they dropped the bomb. Well, literally weeks after Truman was inaugurated, months after Truman was inaugurated, they dropped the bombs.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, this is just reinforcing why I don't think electoralism is the answer and it's not going to save us. Like, when we're looking at a really short time frame to actually make some major changes in order to essentially assure the future of the human race, and everything that we've talked about on this panel tonight is counter to that kind of movement.
Well, see, the thing is, though, what needs to happen is really what we do as individuals, as far as that goes, is pissing in the wind, because we know the bulk of it's coming from industrial sources.
Yeah. So, and my position is start chaining yourself to those industrial sources and making it impossible for them to work. I mean, and
where we are now is exactly the predicted path that we would be on. It's exactly where anybody who paid attention to any part of this particular climate change, right? Anybody who paid any attention at all knew that it would be getting closer and closer and closer to the wire before most people took it seriously. Even closer to the wire than that before the government really took it seriously and did anything. Because again, they don't do anything until those who put them and keep them in power tell them to. because
Right.
if they do anything else, they lose power. And as stated in the comments before, and like I said before, it doesn't. You can't do anything unless you have the power.
The people are ignorant and selfish. No one wanted to change their behavior. Well, it's like as though they would rationalize. Well, it's not real, or it won't be that bad, or a whole bunch of other rationalization.
Motherfucker brings a snowball into Congress to prove it isn't real.
Mhm.
Right, which is like standing out at midnight saying that the sun's never going to come up because it's dark.
We're saying that you can send astronauts to the sun at night.
Man, we're a fucking dumb country. We really are.
Yeah.
Motherfucker said that you'll run out of wind. It is so
really
sad.
is.
It's so funny.
As we get closer, like I'm more and more in the camp of, sunrise movement, or Greta Thunberg even has said that she's moved away from arguing with politicians to help fix things, because we're not going to do it with politicians. We're not going to solve homelessness with politicians either. And we talked earlier, and it was certainly in the chat earlier, that it's difficult to trust that government will do anything for people. And we have all the reason in the world to believe that. And my argument is, we are our own government. When we get together to solve problems, we have to start doing things that aren't legal. I mean, I'm going to flat out promote doing things that may get people arrested, but we're talking about, blockading and interrupting the normal progress of business for companies that will kill us all for very short-term profit. Yeah. And I just don't see any other way around it. We can talk all until we're blue in the face about which candidate we can vote for.
So I'm actually kind of glad that we're talking about this again, because we talked about it last week. So I wanted to say really quick to Kazoom. Last week I yelled at you. I yelled at you pretty forcefully. A lot more forcefully than I've yelled at a lot of people in a long time. And I wanted to kind of like set the record straight, because it was brought to my attention afterwards that it might not be understood why I yelled, or why I said what I said. So I didn't tell you to shut the fuck up because you disagreed with me, but you were talking over me. So that's that out of the way. Now the rest of the bulk of what was said was that you don't have skin in the game. And what I meant by that was not that you don't care about, and this goes to everybody else in here without children, not that you don't care about climate change. But if you don't have a physical, flesh and blood investment into the future and what's going to happen, or possible that you don't understand the same emotional connection to it. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain. I know I was talking about it with someone after.
Well, I mean,
the show.
it's gonna hit home more because you have people that you're bringing up that are going to be dealing with this stuff, and I don't. So I mean, yeah, that goes without saying.
You can put like a name and a face to it. You know what I mean? And I mean, I can do that. I can look into the future and I can put a name and a face to the people in my head that are going to have to deal with the problems that are here after I'm gone. And if you don't have that kind of, offspring for that, it's a little bit different. And saying like,
I mean, even
if you have a family member that gets into a car accident, that is a lot more of an urgent thing to you than if you find out that someone you don't know got into a car accident. I mean, that's just human. That's what it is to be, a parent. It's what it is to be a human being. That's what it is to be those things. I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat because I had a dream that one of my kids drowned. And it's horrifying. If you don't have children, you don't understand that. Or you might understand it, but you don't know what it is to have it. It's a terrifying thing, and it's a horrifying thing. And when you do have flesh and blood children, they're your, made from you. There's this protective instinct that takes over, that you don't have a lot of control over. So you look at the world differently and the dangers of the world differently. And that was what I meant. Not that you don't care, as you don't know what you're talking about, and blah, 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 blah. But the weight that we put on things, you and I, me and Michael, and aren't necessarily the same.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Okay.
Because there are millions of people with skin in the game, just as you do, who don't give a fuck.
Deep Ashtray said that too, and I know. Actually, the person I was talking, Michael. That's what I was talking to about. It was Michael. Had mentioned that last week too, and I was like, yeah, you're right, and I think that's a shame and that's sad. But that doesn't change my feelings, though.
Also,
That doesn't have any bearing on my feelings about the future.
No.
Yeah.
So
I know
you're
I'm
right.
never going
I
to
think
have
it's terrible.
kids. Having kids was never on the table for me personally. But I'm probably not going to be here in 2060. I can't imagine I live that long. But I deeply care about the world being habitable in 2060. I have nieces and nephews, but they're not like, close family members. We live in different states. I rarely see them. I don't really have a personal, intimate connection to the future, but I am horrified that my generation and generations before me will leave it in a position like that is significantly worse, not just a little bit worse, but like we're talking about 140-degree summers in places, unsurvivable temperatures in New Mexico and Arizona, and incredibly destructive wildfires or disasters, hurricanes that are, we're seeing just the start of it. And the idea that we have all allowed this to happen without any real relenting. If anything, it's sped up in the last few years. It's just on a moral proposition, it's unfathomable.
So what I like to think and what I like to tell myself, the delusion that I like to sell myself is that a lot of those people that don't give a fuck just don't know. like they're ignorant of it. And because they don't really know, they don't care.
See, Raymond, I think they're willfully ignorant because they're not willing to change their behavior, which means that they don't really care enough about their children. So I won't doubt that perhaps in your case, because I know how you care about your children. I really do. I've seen you with your children, and I know what your bond is like and what your connection is like. But I just glance at the blanket statement because again, there's people out there who I care more about their children than they do, clearly. And I would say, I would dare to say, of all the people on the panel, I'm most likely the closest to death of all of us. And yet I suffer, and I've talked with people that from an excess of empathy. I was a wreck today over that homeless guy who got rousted by the police. I don't know that person. I don't even know their name, but I was a wreck. So that's why that rubbed me the wrong way.
I just want to jump in because I've been waiting for 10 minutes. To what you were saying before to Kazum, Raven. I get it, but I also don't. I was a parent and began being a parent in 1990, right? And I grew up completely positive that we were going to be smithereens by now in terms of nuclear war. I was so sure of it, but I still gambled with two people's lives that it wasn't going to happen. right? It is an extremely arrogant and selfish thing to do. I've probably watched too many amendment videos, but anyway.
One is too many.
But the point, my point is, it's a hopeful thing to do, and if you don't have hope, there's no point living. And I think the problem with climate change is it's different than Armageddon because we have a mutual interest in not destroying the world with nuclear weapons, whereas with climate change, they have a mutual interest in destroying the world with fossil fuels and consumption. The people, have that interest, not the people.
They have an interest in destroying the world later, and that's the problem with climate change is that it's coming later. It's coming later. And every day that passes is one day later that it's not later.
Right.
You know.
Something I think, the more that someone knows someone who is very young or a child, the more close you know someone that is a child, the more that you can empathize, you can feel sorry for what they may be dealing with in their future.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is.
So if you're a parent of someone, if you're someone's parent, you obviously know a lot about that person. So you're going to, so in that regard, I fully get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but like, Deep Ashtray and Joe and Michael, they're right. They're right. I do what a lot of people did, right? I substituted, my feelings for everybody. And that is just obviously it's not the case, unfortunately. I think if most people thought like me, the world would be a much better place. I like to think, but they don't. And unfortunately, there are a lot of parents who don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And maybe we can line them up and shoot them. I don't know.
Wait, you know I love you, Raven.
But I did wanted to make sure that I said that my telling you to shut the fuck up last week wasn't that because you disagreed with me, but you kept interrupting me, and that was driving me crazy. It was driving me crazy, and I'm sensitive to those kinds of things lately. I don't know why. I just kind of felt like I was getting stepped on. I was just like, holy shit, dude, just let me say what I got to say. This was never an issue before. Just let me say it, And that's why I was like, just shut the fuck up. And it wasn't because we disagreed. It's just I felt like you wouldn't let me speak. So I wanted to make sure I said that and apologize. Also, I wanted to say now what I was trying to say was what I clarified just now. And I also wanted to go further and say that I was wrong because a lot of parents don't give a shit. So anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, everything's good. Everything's good. No worries.
Well, one thing that a friend of mine who he was my financial planner for a while. Then he was like selling insurance, and I was a teacher. But anyway, when he was selling insurance, he told me that like he would encounter families like parents in their 30s, maybe 40s, and they had young children. And he was like, well, you should at least get a term life policy. So this way that goes until your child turns 18, so that if you die before your child reaches 18, that they're not stuck, that they're going to have some money, the family's going to have some money to fall back on. So at least replace your income if you die prematurely. And he said to these people, which is a very reasonable thing to do. And these people literally would say to him stuff like, well, no, we haven't needed it because no one's died yet. It's like, well, of course you can't die. You can't buy insurance after you fucking die. You have to buy. That's the whole point. You're hedging your bets, and they basically would go on leaving their family unprotected. And these were young people who were healthy, non-smokers, so their premiums are going to be like $12 a month. But they wouldn't do it because there was, and I forget which fallacy it is, but basically it's like, well, I haven't lost yet, so I'll just keep on not losing.
One of the other things I just want to say real quick about this issue with climate change and fear for the future, I even if there was no climate change and everything was going to be fine as far as the climate is concerned, I'm equally or almost as concerned anyway about, my kids who are only one generation, their generation millennial, and the generation Z, and then the new generation coming up. Concepts of freedom that I took for granted in the 1970s are already quaint right? And they'll never have any idea of it's just, you know, concepts of privacy and general liberty are I mean, we let them trample on our liberties all the time. I'm bringing up the TSA again, for example, you know, that you just surrender your Fourth Amendment to go through those back scanners every time you do. You know what I mean? Just as an example.
For something
the Michael Chertoff porno scanners, as I call them.
Yeah, for something that's likely never ever to happen again.
Yeah. Well, also just that, you know, Michael Chertoff, who was a principal investor in the company that built and installed all those, made money, you know, directly off of. I mean, it's just like the most incestuous thing.
Yeah, I mean,
not that I want to bring up incest and nudity in the same conversation. Sorry,
but you know, the thing that gets me is that there's, you know, what I've tried to you know, get people to wrap their brain around is that there's a number of things, because people are like, well, what if it's not happening? So like, what if I, you know, changed my behavior and it wasn't real? And like, but there's so many things that we can and should be doing that would be good for us regardless. Like even if you just saying we were all wrong about climate change, like somehow we screwed it up and it wasn't really happening. There's a ton of things that we could and should be doing out of that set of things that are possible to do that would address climate change, that are just good for us anyway.
Yeah.
So my thing was at least support those things.
Decarring our cities so that we reclaim cities for walking pedestrians again. You know, it's just like one example of, you know, we cut carbon, we remove like the noisy traffic from our cities, and we return to a cosmopolitan place where we can all sit at, you know, cafes halfway into the street, you know, drinking mimosas or whatever it is. There's lots of reasons to decar our cities. But I do get a little bit frustrated with the discussion coming back to the responsibility of us as individuals. Because again, you know, we've talked about this before, the United States military is the largest polluter in the world. Just troop movements, just ship movements, you know, just incredibly huge polluters. The vast majority of all of climate change comes from a very small group of very productive companies, productive in not necessarily good sense.
Yeah, 70% of all greenhouse emissions are emitted by 100 companies.
Yeah.
70%. So we can use all those paper straws in the world and recycle every single recyclable consumable that we go through, and it'll scratch the surface. It's better than not doing it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can stop driving, you know, anywhere for the rest of my life, and, you know, 1 hour of U.S. military troop movements will far overwhelm whatever carbon reduction I made.
When I was in the service, my MOS was air condition mechanic, and I enlisted after Freon was outlawed. The United States military still used Freon. And I mean, it was pretty liberally released into the atmosphere. They used Freon when they were training us how to work with Freon, and they would tell us, like, this is bad, don't do this. And it was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I was actually certified to work on refrigeration units using Freon. Which I thought at the time was, oh, this is great. And then when I came home, I found out, yeah, you can't use that in the civilian world.
I got to address a trope that's been brought up that I really fucking tired of hearing. No, you didn't. There was one magazine article that misinterpreted a scientific paper and said some shit that the paper didn't say because it wasn't a peer-reviewed journal. It was just a popular media bullshit. And that was it. There were no fucking scientists that were believing that there was an ice age coming. So stop this bullshit. Stop saying this, or I'm going to boot you next time.
No, Joe, you have to have some mercy, because I can think of at least 2 rock bands that made some songs about the coming ice age. right?
I mean, there is a big problem with scientific reporting in the United States. Like we've always had this problem where papers get conflated with, one crazy idea or
There's a reason for that.
misinterpretation.
There's a reason for that. Science is boring to most people, and in order to report
Gotta
things about
sex it up.
science, you have to make it fun.
Yeah, but just there was a narrative there at one time, though, whether it was true or not, whether it was something that was floating around that there could be an upcoming ice age at some point. So
again, because there was one article, and then right-wing politicians used that as a talking point, and so the more they would talk about it, then other people would hear it. Okay, thank you. I'm glad to hear you were joking. That's fine, Proctor Hawks. But there's the thing. But this thing kept so basically they perpetuated a lie because they didn't want to acknowledge that what was actually happening.
fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt we're going to see the end of this. We're going to continually see, wildly misinterpreted studies picked up by one media outlet that then spreads it to other media outlets. This is not going to be the last time that, everybody gets the impression that science has discovered whatever it is, and it's not going to be based in reality. I think that's just going to continue happening.
Well, anytime a pop science or a general media thing talks about some discovery in biology, the advertising is always rewrites evolution. No, it didn't. It fucking didn't. And when you actually get into the weeds of what was actually there, most of it's like trivial, like minor changes, like, oh, it totally rewrites, just to get people to read it. And then of course people, and of course I keep running into creation. It's like, see, science was wrong, and this totally changes everything. Like, no, it doesn't. Like was it lateral gene transfer? So it was proposed. It looks like there may actually be some evidence of it. So it's okay. Well, this is just one more transport mechanism beyond just simple inheritance. That's all. Doesn't say inheritance doesn't happen. Inheritance and mutation. That there's possibly some sideways transfer. Okay.
Now, climate change. One of the things with climate change is, and what I don't think people really understand, like if we were to beginning tomorrow, stop 100% use of all fossil fuels, and we stop dumping shit in rivers and stop releasing stuff into the atmosphere, and recycling is done 100% and we're perfect on it. New York City is still flooding. Miami is still flooding. Millions of people are still going to die. We've already bought that. We've already paid for that. We just didn't get the product yet, but we've already paid for it. That's how
Mail.
Yeah, right. The climate, that's how climate works, because it moves so slow, because it's dependent on the cycles of the earth. It doesn't come right away. So yeah, that's all still going to happen no matter what we do. And people don't seem to understand that. And what the thinking for most people is when New York is flooded, then I'll care, and then I will do something. But by then, it's too late.
I've got a question for the gang. If science fiction isn't necessarily too far from reality sometimes, and I mean, if there was a modern equivalent of, like, say, for example, Nikola Tesla, I'm sure someone would be talking about, let's create some sort of technology to control the weather. I mean, I know they control weather on a very localized scale, but when it comes to climate, that's a completely different subject. What are you all? How receptive would you be if Elon Musk, let's just say, since it's a well-known name in science, came up with a weather control device that could control weather over, I don't know, let's just say 1/8 of the Earth's surface at any given time?
HARP?
So,
Yeah, right.
there's actually, has anybody seen Thunderfoot's most recent video where he's talking
I
about
stopped watching him.
sodium? He has an interesting video where he looks at, because he had previously done a bunch of research into how under certain conditions sodium explodes in water. It's very energetic. And he had this proposal recently that is kind of interesting, that is definitely a geoengineering idea. And I'm not going to put Thunderfoot into the camp of being a Tesla, but I'm definitely not going to put Elon Musk in that camp either. But it is an interesting idea. It's an idea where you replace the combustion that we typically do with fossil fuels with a slightly modified combustion. It's still using fossil fuels, but the end net product doesn't produce carbon. The carbon is absorbed, turned into sodium, the sodium, or something like that. And forgive me, I'm not a chemist. I'm not going to be clear on exactly it. I'd have to watch the video.
Yeah,
again.
I'll have to watch that because that's Philosopher's Stone kind of stuff, kind of talking. Changing carbon into sodium.
There are some. It's pretty interesting, and it's one of those things where I'm not well enough acquainted with how this works, but the end result, unfortunately, is yes, you don't produce carbon from burning methane, for instance, but you do produce a acrid white smoke that would not be breathable by humans. But his suggestion is if you were going to power things in rural areas away from population centers, you would be generating energy. Say you were doing power plants or something like that, you were generating energy using this form of combustion, and the end result is these clouds of very dense white smoke, which also has the net effect of creating more reflective surface in that part, like localized to that power station, for instance, in order to reflect more heat back into the atmosphere, lowering temperatures overall. And it's an interesting idea. Now, whether or not I trust humans to go ahead and use a technology like this for good, I mean, first you have to wonder who has the money to implement it, and are they doing it for noble reasons. But it also, like, obviously it's creating an acrid, unbreathable white smoke. So there's a possibility that it has huge knock-on effects for wildlife or for, people working in that industrial setting. Yeah.
But
I don't know. I think we should cover the North Pole with solar panels.
The other thing too, burning methane does produce CO2. So I just wanted to.
Right. You have to watch the video to see how he took. It's like a two-step process where burning the methane under these certain circumstances end up converting the CO2 so that it joins with another atom and creates this third substance that is then changed and expelled as a solid, but it's a solid that is incredibly fine particulate, and that's that smoke. And the smoke, the carbon atom has been absorbed and used up in this transformation into this other material, which I
See, the thing about that though is then you could then it wouldn't even matter if you're using fossil fuel, because you'd still have the CO2. If you could capture the CO2 that way, and you could still use, it wouldn't matter what fuel you were using then, as long as it was putting out CO2.
Yeah, and that's the point he's trying to make, is that it does two things simultaneously. It allows you to continue burning fossil fuels. It doesn't seem to me that you could just burn them in normal engines. Like, you would have to build new engines to do this process, but you would not be emitting carbon. And the second thing is you would be creating these white clouds of smoke or smoke is the wrong word, because it's a fine particulate of some type of ash or something. A mist that would be reflective and would, help to basically be doing what our missing polar ice caps are no longer doing.
Actually, smoke probably would be reasonably appropriate, because you're still putting out
fine particles is what smoke is. Smoke is fine particles. It's fumes that doesn't have particles. Fume, so maybe that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, smoke is effectively particles and water, water vapor.
yeah, then I guess smoke is actually the appropriate term because that's what he's talking about. I highly recommend the video. Again, it's not particularly a political one. I know that Thunderfoot can be controversial in his political takes, but I tend to find at least his comment section will call him out if he's radically incorrect on some scientific question or chemistry question.
I thought Thunderfoot gave up doing political videos after he sort of disavowed Sargon of Akkad.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He didn't entirely, but most of his political videos are more focused on the MAGA crowd, or Elon Musk, or various people who establish themselves as political leaders in some way that is more destructive than positive.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll take a look at it. I remember it was funny. We met him at the Reason Rally #1. Raven was there, and I was there. Mike, were you there?
No.
Zelda was there. No. Yeah. She
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, it's because I was leaning on her.
That's right.
I had my elbow up on her head. That's telling you how small she was.
And,
I
but so we at one point we're in the lobby, and Thunderfoot comes by, and he was like, he I guess he recognized a few faces, and he came over to like grace us with his presence. And he was pretty much like arrogant to everybody, and he was with me until he found out I was a chemical engineer, and then he totally changed his tune. And we actually ended up talking about 45 minutes about the research he was working on at the time, because I could understand what he was talking about.
Me?
I'll try and work on my Thunderfoot impression, but all you need is simple back of the envelope calculations you can see just immediately what a complete moron that Elon Musk is. He's just completely out of his league.
So I was lying on a bed in somebody's hotel room during Reason Rally with Philip Trubuka, a couple of other people. I don't remember exactly who. I'm sorry?
Meridian Frost.
But no, lying in the bed though.
Oh, in the bed. Okay.
Me, Trupuka, Cave Girl, who I've recently learned has passed, and her husband was there. Prof was standing next to the bed, and we're all drinking wine. And Thunderfoot comes in and dives on the bed. So there's a picture floating around of me in bed with Thunderfoot. But he dives on the bed, and wine goes flying everywhere.
Mm.
And all over Prof's brand new shoes that he has spent on that so far, that up until that point in the weekend he was showing everybody. Just like, the guy just bought these. Aren't these nice? All red wine all over them.
Yeah.
And then Thunderfoot gets up like nothing happened and leaves the room. And everybody's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I was hanging out with
one of Newton's laws is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So if you jump on the bed, there's going to be a recoil. He's a scientist, right? He should know these things.
Party foul. Science of party foul.
Yeah. And that was amazing. I remember being in that room because it was like I'm looking around, and Peach was there, and DPR Jones was there, Shayra was there, Sierra was there, and Zelda was there, Meridian Frost showed up. Lisa
That's
was
why
there.
I was surprised. I was surprised that during that whole trip that the people that I didn't end up in bed with was Shayra and Sierra. But
I like Kazoom's joke in the comments.
Thunderfowl.
Thunderfowl. Thunderfowl like a bird. Thunder chicken.
Yeah, those were good times. I miss those days.
I wanted to mention something because you talked, Paul, a little bit about science fiction earlier. At least you brought it up. And there was a direction I thought you might be going, but you didn't end up going here, which is about how, and it's been talked in science fiction circles for a while now, how science fiction has been very pessimistic for a long time. We've had innumerable, like, end of the world or, catastrophic situations, certainly, starting with Mad Max. And I mean, not starting with Mad Max, but, Mad Max being sort of one of the early science fiction pieces. And, as somebody who writes science fiction myself and is interested in producing stories that have the science fiction bent, I've felt more and more drawn to get away from post-apocalypse as a genre. And as much as I've always enjoyed post-apocalypse fiction, it seems to me that if science fiction's position, I was just speaking with my friend earlier in the day about this, that if science fiction is the way that art tends to try and create a warning, if artists are sort of a vanguard of culture and trying to sort of see around the next corner and then tell the rest of us what's going to happen, the warnings of science fiction were unheeded 40 years ago. Whatever it is, 1981 is when Road Warrior came out, Mad Max 2. I'm sure there's other significant pieces of post-apocalyptic fiction from before that.
Sure.
Those warnings weren't heeded, and I feel very strongly that I need to start transforming my own work to get away from post-apocalypse and start talking about something that is more optimistic about how do we get out of the post-apocalypse and start generating that Star Trek future that was optimistic, that idea that we could all
So you
live
start.
in-
So you start your story then in a post-apocalyptic world, though.
yeah, and
You
that's
still have to touch it.
where a story that I started 15 years ago or something, and I put a blog post up about it. I'll share it with you guys in the private chat at some point. But digging it out and going and polishing it up and working on, now that I'm in a position where I have a studio and I might actually be able to execute on some of this art that I had planned on doing.
I don't know where your head
Changing.
is at. I don't know where your head is at on that, but I'm just, just sitting here talking about it. That kind of a story would be politics heavy. It would have to be. Like, because I mean, in a post-apocalyptic world, to get to like a Star Trek, existence, there would have to be a lot of politics to get there.
Yeah, see,
People would have to band together.
and to your point, Jack, about science fiction going very dark and negative. This is the main reason why I didn't like the more recent Battlestar Galactica compared to the first season of the old. Forget Galactica 1980, that was a piece of garbage. But the thing is, because even though the setting for the first one was dark, because obviously humanity is on the brink, but it was hopeful. That was the thing. It was all about how do we got to keep finding hope and keep finding ways to survive. Whereas the newer one was everyone's a scumbag,
Hi, Pete.
and humanity's really not worth saving because they're all just, I mean, they're just so flawed that they're really no good. And it was just like, I can't get behind that. And again, it's kind of like we were talking before. There's no hope, there's no reason to live.
Yeah, and I mean, despite all the pessimism that we've talked about in this stream and other streams, and I know people in the chat have commented on previous weeks that as a group we're getting more sort of doomerish, or there's more doomerish conversation that we've been having really since the beginning of this year, with an obvious catalyst to some of that. But I am still fundamentally optimistic. I can't really change that about myself. I don't have a necessarily realistic approach to how we change the world. I just feel like it has to happen, and we have to get started on that project, because the longer we wait, the worse everything gets.
Well, I mean, I obviously don't know what the future holds, but partly, but not only because I'm a parent, but partly because I'm a parent. Sure. I mean, I have to give a fuck, and um, I, I'm terrified at the idea that, like you mentioned before, Jack. I mean, there might be certain places that are uninhabitable, which currently have millions of people in them, and even if we gave all those people a free place to live, the path from now to that is, unimaginable.
Yeah, meanwhile, the people in Galveston are putting up seawalls to stop the encroaching sea that's coming up from underneath.
There's a whole bunch of cities that are in peril. I mean, like I've said before, something close to 80% of humanity lives within 100 miles of the ocean. So that's a frightening statistic if you think the polar ice caps melt. I'm not sure if it's true, but when I was in high school, I remember my teacher said that if the polar ice caps melted, that the oceans would rise 200 feet. But I have to think that polar ice caps have melted like by 50% just in the past 20 years, and the seas haven't risen by 100 feet. So
Right.
that statistic must have been wrong.
That's one of those situations because even Al Gore kind of mentioned that number in An Inconvenient Truth. And it's one of those things where a scientific study gets sort of misinterpreted and gets out into the popular culture. There's the possibility that if the ice caps melt entirely, we're talking about 21 to 35 feet.
Yeah, that's
of
what I
ocean
heard. Like
rise.
22 feet was
Yeah.
the number I heard.
Yeah, and I think like the 35-foot number is the ice caps melted entirely, and we're just looking at pure ocean water at that point. So and that's unlikely. I mean, even in some of the worst case scenarios, there will still be parts of the globe that are so cold that like Antarctica will still exist. There will still be some ice, but it's a tremendous problem. So you're talking about anybody who is more than 21 feet above sea level will have flooding. And of course, much higher than that in great storms, which we're going to have a lot more of.
Yeah, and obviously, as awful as that is for all of us and society and civilization, there's a hell of a lot of critters that are going to perish because of all this stuff as well. And I feel almost as bad about that as the rest of it. You know what I mean? I mean, because it's not their fault. They're just living, man.
Yeah.
Well,
and to that point, the one of the most sort of pessimistic things that I see that, challenges any degree of optimism I have is when I hear that 97% of the fish in fisheries have been, or we've lost 97% of the fish in most national fisheries, and that we're seeing species decline in just such incredible numbers that it will take hundreds of thousands of years for us to get back to the level of biodiversity that we had in 1940.
And to that point, every time you make a hole in the ecosystem, something else comes and fills its place. Like, where there's no natural predators for certain animals, other animals come in. And so what used to be a balanced ecosystem is completely out of whack.
Right. I mean, it'll find a new balance, but it may not be good.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking to somebody a few months back, and I was showing them, somebody there was a picture of somewhere on the Jersey Shore, and it was like a picture from like 1970 or something like that. It was an overhead shot, and a picture from more recent times, and you can see that there's dozens of feet lost off the beach. And I showed this to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, watch this beach erosion." I'm like, do you not understand how beach erosion works? And like, yes, because the water came up and now the cycle is moving closer in, so it's pulling stuff out. But it's still, the depth isn't really, it's still shallow. It's shallow out for several miles. There's certain spots where you can like walk out for like a long distance. So like, it's not just as washing the sand away. The water is higher, and that's giving it more reach to go inland and pull more sand away from the beach. That's what's going on. And they didn't want to accept it. And I'm like, well, you look, you're like, well, where's the proof? Here it fucking is. And then there's other places where they have things where they can measure absolute depth, and changes in depth, and it's like I think there's parts of Florida where it's already risen like over a foot. It's like a foot, foot and change or something like that, and it's like, well, there's this other spot of evidence, like, oh no, that's not enough.
Yeah,
Miami.
Proctor Hawk says, what is it? Planet Mercury is super balanced in terms of, you can return to a balance, but it's not a survivable balance for us.
Right.
It's like Miami has what they call sunny day flooding. So it's like, they don't even need rain. Just floods.
They're on borrowed time in Miami and New Orleans and Venice and a whole bunch of cities.
I'm honestly surprised that New Orleans survived this last storm. I thought they were done. But they kept saying that the New Orleans was basically in the strike zone of the hurricane. I said to Peach, I said, that's it. It's gone. It's gone. I'm really surprised it's still there. If I believed in God, I would say, there but for the grace of God.
Oh, and speaking of which, you mentioned, I just did a search on sunny day floods. Damp Jersey Shore town ponders a fix for sunny day floods. Nothing that you can do. So it's Bayhead, New Jersey.
Hey, there's something I was just thinking about when it was talked about earlier about the Constitution. I think it's important to have a decent, solid base to, like, we check things constantly to see whether they're constitutional, right? Someone pushes something, we check to see whether it's constitutional. If we didn't have a good constitution, we wouldn't have that process. We probably wouldn't have lasted as long as we have, So I just needed to stress that having a good constitution is important.
Well, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I think what the point Jack made and then I bolstered was that it has not been applied, evenly or correctly or properly ever. That there have been exceptions made that were, think about eminent domain even. Eminent domain, the purpose of eminent domain was that if there needed to be some public work that, so something that benefits all of society and your house was in the way, that they'd say, here's market value of your house and we need to move you so we can build a bridge or a road or something like that. And most people are okay with that. But over the last 30 years, they've been taking away private property to give it to the use of other private people. That's how they did things in Hoboken. There was all the river. Now they redeveloped the riverfront. Looks beautiful. It's all nice and everything, but wasn't for the benefit of all the people of Hoboken. It was for the benefit of some people who had lots of money who wanted to build some shit there. So they basically took the property away from other people, gave it to a second group of people, let them develop it, and so they made a lot of money, but they took people's property away.
And even
so another problem is there. You hear this all the time, and it's said in like a source of pride, that we are striving to be a more perfect union. All the time, right? We're always fighting. They're always striving. That there are different, groups, whether they're ethnic groups or gay rights, whatever, that are always constantly pushing us forward to make us a better country or a more perfect union. The Constitution is there. We should have always have been a perfect union, always. We should never have to keep pushing for it. The fact that we have to push for it at all should be worrying. It should be disturbing to most people, but it's not. When you say that we are working
any base is going to have any base that we made a long time ago is going to have things modified as time goes on, as society changes and all that. There's we're gonna move away from the base to some degree, but the
Constitution itself isn't being altered though. What's being changed is who it applies to. when it's originally supposed to apply to everybody to begin with, but it doesn't.
Well, wouldn't the argument then to be that we need to apply it to more things?
Right. Well, I mean, the
Well, I'm
government
just saying that
itself.
So okay, so it's saying that it's being made into wrapping paper when it should be more upfront in what we actually stand for.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, essentially,
Inside the wrapping paper.
yeah, that's my argument, is that it didn't really stand for what it claimed to stand for. It was just it was flowery language without a backing in actual ethics.
Yeah.
And that's the project we're in, is trying to make it actually do the things that the flowery language has, said it was always there to do.
Right. Right, because if it was upheld as it's written from the beginning, women would have had the right to vote. Slavery would have been against the law everywhere. Everyone's voting rights would have been protected, but they weren't. Like, you ever heard the Dred Scott decision?
I'm unfamiliar.
Okay, so there was a man named Dred Scott. He was in Missouri and he was enslaved. His owners took him to Illinois, which was a free state. Illinois said, basically, if you bring your slaves here, they're not slaves anymore. They were there for some time. Then they brought him back to Missouri, and so he sued and said, well, hey, under Illinois law, I'm free. And the Supreme Court said, nah, you're basically not a citizen, so you have no rights, which isn't an act. The funny thing is, there's nothing in the Constitution, or very little in the Constitution, that actually refers strictly to citizens. Most of the rights enumerated are to anybody. So if you're visiting from Germany, the Bill of Rights still applies to you.
Well, citizenship is established in the 14th Amendment, which was, of course, as a result of the end of the war.
Right. So basically, black people were not considered citizens until the 14th Amendment. So even once they were free, they still weren't citizens until that was the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery. The 14th Amendment, or outlawing slavery in most cases.
So and the problem with Dred Scott, though, is that it runs afoul of the Constitution anyway, because the Constitution, as stated before, doesn't necessarily refer to or apply to citizens. It applies to people. It refers to people, which is why there's no such thing as an illegal immigrant. Anybody who comes to the United States, whether they come here through legal or illegal means, are automatically protected by the Constitution. And
that's what I was talking about the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment uses both words and separates them as specific things. So you're a citizen if you were born in the United States, but then it still grants you the rights of, the equal protection of the law to all people.
People, because that's what
you're a citizen if you're born, and that until the 14th Amendment, there's never officially established in the Constitution what made you a citizen.
So
you just live in America, because most people who lived in America came from overseas.
Right. So what ends up happening, as an example of things that end up happening, is like right now there are undocumented people who are being, held. Basically, they're being illegally imprisoned, and then they're brought in front of these, a judge without legal representation. Many times, not speaking the same language as the people that are hearing their case. And, they have to now defend the fact that they're in the country. And then they're basically thrown out the same day. And that entire process runs afoul of the Constitution. They found like legal justifications to get around it or whatever, but that would be an example of the Constitution not being applied the way it's supposed to be applied. And it's something that we deal with every day in this country, and most people are quite okay with that.
Well, like we said, if you go by what the Constitution actually says, civil asset forfeitures runs afoul of the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of it multiple times. And again, if you think about poll taxes and literacy tests and just out and out laws that say Negroes can't vote, those stayed on the books for a long time. It wasn't until 1964, and even then, we're still fighting to make sure that we can actually get out to vote. I mean, I'm fortunate living here in New Jersey. There were a couple bills introduced by Republicans and they went nowhere, but But if I have relatives in Alabama, and they have to deal with this shit.
So I wanted to address Deep Ashtray and Proctor Hawk. How do we decide? How do we or who decides what a perfect union is? And Proctor saying that's always a question. I hear perfecting and my spidey senses go off. I'm sorry, I was using that terminology because that's what Abraham Lincoln said. Um, a more perfect union.
Well, and
it's a turn of phrase.
It's in the Constitution also.
Yeah, it's in the preamble. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know, why your spidey senses would go off, or why anybody's saying that somebody's going to decide. So
well, certainly, I mean, in the discussion of whether or not the union excludes a whole class of people, simply for their skin color, which is like a
3/5
incredibly minor genetic marker in terms of what makes people human. Obviously, a more perfect union is the one that says that all humans who are born in this, the borders of this nation are citizens.
You just reminded me of something I saw on Twitter today. I retweeted because there's a clip of Michael Flynn going around where he's talking about how America has to be one nation under God, and that necessarily means one religion. And the whole one nation under God thing obviously comes from the Pledge of Allegiance, more modern version. Right. But my whole thing is the most important part about that is not the one nation under God. I mean, obviously for me, because I'm an atheist, but it's also the fact that it's what follows that. With liberty and justice for all is kind of the most important part of the Pledge of Allegiance in terms of philosophy. I think we should be looking towards liberty and justice for all, just in general. You know what I mean? As a espoused value.
About 2 years ago, I had a Democrat, a fellow Democrat, tell me that the First Amendment means basically, freedom of religion doesn't mean freedom. Freedom of religion doesn't mean freedom from religion. That you don't have freedom from religion. Guaranteed by the Constitution. And I almost fell over that it was a Democrat that said that. I was like, you're serious?
Well, there are religious Democrats, and
it's fine to be religious, but I mean to basically say what the right wing talking point is freedom of religion means free for our religion, not for yours, and it's in essence the same exact thing.
Well, whoever that was that said that is a moron, because that's just clearly not straight.
Well, I mean, what I told her was that the only way to have freedom of religion is to have freedom from religion, that one necessitates the other. So,
yeah. Listen, friends, we should be starting to wind down the show in the next few minutes. So is there any sort of thing pressing on your conscience that we haven't had a chance to discuss?
I wasn't paying.
Okay.
What, Mike?
While Zonstar was here, he brought up something in my wheelhouse as far as the story about fentanyl and Tucker Carlson. But that story, as far as addiction counselors are concerned, was dwarfed this whole past week by Henry Ruggs, the NFL star, who had a DUI and killed a lady and her dog, right? And then their car went up in flames. And when he was finally pulled over after doing 150 miles an hour, and he had a loaded AK in his Lambo and all that. All of that was like a juicy story about a DUI, and I do therapy for people who have DUIs. So I was wanting to hear more about that story, and what I heard more about was Aaron fucking Rodgers won't take a fucking COVID shot, right? And at first I was like, okay, why are they not doing more on the story of Henry Ruggs, where a lady and her dog died. Every time I see the story, it's and her dog. Can't forget the dog, right? Because that makes people care. But
Well, that's what makes me care.
But like I see like dozens and dozens of news stories about Aaron Rodgers, saying that he was immunized when he only like consulted a
Homeopath.
homeopath about it and all that. And now he's going to be talking with Joe Rogan. And I'm like, gosh, Joe Rogan does not constitute like a religious exemption, you fucking moron. You know. But at the same time,
Aaron
like,
Rodgers.
why don't we see more about that other story about the guy who killed a lady and her dog? Even though it's the more salacious story. And I thought, could it be racism that like the NFL just likes stories with like a white person's face on
This
it?
is the first I'm hearing about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of. I mean, I'm not somebody who follows sports media
So-
anyway.
One NFL player killed somebody while drunk, and he's going to be facing a lot of time. The other one didn't take the COVID shot, and that's the story that I've been hearing.
Right,
watching NFL pre-games like the whole fucking week. I'm waiting for the other story to be presented, and all I hear about is Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers. And then I realized Aaron Rodgers not taking the shot actually plays well to the rest of the NFL's viewer base. It's just me who's fucked up as an NFL watcher that I am pro shot, and so him taking that stand actually looks good to a good portion of the people who watch the NFL. And then I'm like, oh, it's not really so much like racist, because like for a second there I was like, well, that kind of plays in Henry Ruggs' favor that he doesn't get as much coverage, for what he did. But like, yeah, it's not that Aaron Rodgers is white and they rather go with that story. It's just that he's like a 10-year star of the NFL, and they want a story like his to increase viewership, and that's fucked up.
Yeah.
It's about setting the narrative as well. Like I've said before, they don't seem to stray very far from a few sort of directions on the major news channels that I'm exposed to anyway. And I'm fed up with it, to be honest. But that's a whole nother story.
Well, when news became a cost center, that's when things went tits up. I mean, like I said, media's been shit most of the time, but we had that hard cut of about 40 years where it was decent, but then it's like, oh, we got to make money on this shit, and it's too well. That's one of the reasons why I love. There's one of many reasons I love John Oliver, but one of the reasons I love John Oliver is he takes an opportunity, every opportunity he gets, to attack AT&T, even though they're the parent company of the company he works for. He goes right after him, and that's fucking awesome.
Yeah. Raven was talking about how politicians will pander to the middle class a lot and then just not give them anything. And to me, that reminded me of my favorite quote from that video Jack was talking about at the New York Times that Johnny Harris produced. And the quote that was in it was amazing. It was, it's not the haves versus have-nots. It's the haves versus the have-yachts.
That is a good line. Yeah.
That is great. Now, to your point about the media or people liking the white face or over the black face. So Larry, I don't know if you remember Larry Wilmore's show that he had a few years back.
Yeah,
I love the show. I used to watch it all the time.
it was great.
And they bumped it off for Jordan Kevin. So I looked in Larry at the last few months of Larry's show. He was averaging like 700,000 viewers. And the average for the entire time of the other dude's show was like 400,000. So a little bit more than half.
Jordan Klepper was only getting 400,000.
Yes.
Both of them Daily Show alums, but
Yeah, yeah. Basically. So here they had a slot that was already primed. Daily Show was riding high, and they kick Larry off to put Bland White Dude in, and Bland White Dude gets lower ratings and gets longer. Larry got 1 season, Jordan got 2.
Clipper had his own show.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Did he
wasn't very
really?
good. I watched one episode and I was not able to get through it.
Yeah, it was bland and bullshit and stupid, but he got 2 seasons out of it because it's all right because it's all white.
I mean, as a fan of The Wire, I still say is probably the greatest American-made television show ever. And when it was on between 2003 and 2008, it got some of the worst ratings. Just nobody would watch it. And I still constantly say, if you want to understand America, watch The Wire, like as much as possible.
Well, I've never seen The Wire, so I have no opinion, but I'm always going to come down on the original Twilight Zone as the best TV that's ever been made.
I'm grieving you for your sin of not having watched The Wire. No, seriously.
I've never seen The Wire
immediately.
I lived abroad. I didn't have a TV from about, heck, I don't even know, 2005.
I'm sure it's on HBO Max or something like that because it was an
Right.
HBO show. It's only 5 seasons. Each episode or each season is something like either 12 or maybe 14 episodes. It might have been
so it's about a 3-week binge watch.
Yeah, it's a very hooky show too because it was done in a time when television, narrative television still had to have kind of a cliffhanger at the end of each episode. So it's structured that way. But it's really good, incisive commentary, and it's probably more applicable to all the folks on the East Coast. I mean, it resembled Oakland. It takes place in Baltimore. But
I thought it took place in the Jersey area because I could have sworn there was some episodes in Booton, but
it's definitely got an East Coast vibe. But yeah, great show. Everybody watch it.
Yeah, I'm just still waiting. As I this past summer I ended up like binge watching Better Call Saul.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, part of it was on my trip out to Chicago, so I watched through season 4, but season 5 is not available yet for free on Netflix or any of this. I can watch it, but I have to pay, and I'm like, I don't want to pay. I want it for free. So I'm like, well, when the fuck is it coming out? When is it going to be free?
I mean, free. You still pay for the streaming service it's on or whatever.
Right. But yeah, I don't have to pay extra because I mean,
right.
That's the thing. I actually the other day I got like 2 weeks ago I got pissed off. There's too many fucking services. It's like everybody's got their this plus and that plus, and you have to sign up for everything. And I'm like,
this is just the cable package all over again.
Yeah, only worse because it's more expensive, and I gotta, and so I actually said, fuck off to a few of them. I dropped Disney, no, not Disney, but I dropped Paramount Plus because I don't like any of the new Star Trek shows except for Picard, and Picard's not coming out for at least another year. So I'm not gonna. I'll come back and I'll get it for a month again, and I'll binge watch it when once it's done. And I dropped Discovery Plus.
That's what we do. That's what we do, by the way. That's yeah.
Yeah, I had Discovery Plus, but the main reason why is because they were putting up new Alton Brown content, but they weren't putting it on Food Network or Food TV or Cook. They were doing it only on Discovery Plus, excuse me. And then, but now that's done, they terminated the show. So I got no fucking reason to
I'm going to stand on this hill and possibly die on it, but I think Adam Ragusea is as good as Alton Brown and free.
I watch Adam, so I do like him. I don't think he is as good as Alton Brown, but I do like him. Adam makes a bunch of assertions that are demonstrably not true. But other than that, but I do like him though. He does make good food and he does make interesting videos. And actually, Alton Brown's on YouTube now anyway, so so I can watch him there as well.
Okay, well then you get the best of.
I can watch them both. Yeah, I can watch them both.
Well, hey, friends, this looks like a good spot to sort of wind the show down. So I'm going to thank the people in the comment section and obviously thank the 5 of you as well for joining me. I felt a bit weird today because I started out by myself. Thank you, Raven, for always being the first one in. Or almost always. Sometimes Michael is. Yeah. But, anyway. So anyway, say goodbye, everybody, and we'll join you all
Bye,
again.
everybody.
On the
Bye, everybody.
Bye.